Montana is known for big skies, open land, and quiet towns. But behind that beauty is another story, one made of missing people, unanswered questions, and cases that were never solved. From mountains and forests to small towns and reservations, people have disappeared without leaving a clear trail. Families are still searching. Investigators still wait for the one clue that could break a case open. Two brothers vanish, above the clouds, the Whitehead boys of Glacier. It starts with a simple postcard. A short message, written in tidy handwriting, mailed from a mountain lodge in Montana in the summer of 1924. The kind of note a son sends a mother to say everything is fine. "We are enjoying ourselves very much and taking no chances," the postcard reads. "Don't worry, mother." 4 days later, the two brothers who wrote it vanished somewhere along a high trail in Glacier National Park and were never seen again. Their names were Joseph and William Whitehead, young men from Chicago who had travelled west for what was meant to be a classic American adventure. Joseph was 29, an engineer and former lieutenant in the Army Ordnance Corps. William was 22, a student at MIT. They were both described as steady, disciplined, and careful. They wrote home often. They followed plans. Nothing in their lives suggested recklessness. The brothers arrived at Glacier in August of 1924, a time when the park was wild in a way difficult to imagine today. Trails existed, but many were faint. Weather changed quickly. Snowfields lingered high on the passes even in late summer. Rangers were few. Communication with the outside world was slow. Visitors had little more than maps printed on thin paper, a compass, and the advice of whoever happened to be working at a chalet. The Whiteheads spent several days hiking between the park's rustic lodges, which were still new additions in that era. Their final known stop was Granite Park Chalet, a stone building perched near the tree line, surrounded by sweeping valleys and sharp ridges. On the morning of August 24th, they left the chalet with the intention of hiking roughly 20 miles south to what was then known as the Lewis Hotel, now Lake McDonald Lodge. Their train home to Chicago was scheduled to depart shortly after. They left in good weather, lightly packed, wearing knickers and wool sweaters, planning to make the trip in a single day. Other hikers recalled seeing them on the trail, moving quickly and confidently. One witness remembered them smiling. Then the trail curved around a ridge, and the brothers stepped into the backcountry and disappeared. When they failed to return to Chicago, their mother raised the alarm, and soon Glacier National Park mounted one of the largest searches of its early history. Rangers, local mountaineers, and Blackfeet and Kootenai guides covered the trails between Granite Park and Lake McDonald. They searched ridgelines, avalanche chutes, basins, creek beds, and the steep cliffs that line the region. Searchers noted that the terrain was unforgiving, sudden drop-offs, unstable slopes, and narrow switchbacks carved into the sides of mountains. A misstep in some areas could send a person sliding hundreds of feet into rocky terrain no search team could safely reach. Despite days of searching, not a single trace was found. No clothing, no packs, no footprints, not even a disturbed patch of earth. It was as if the brothers had walked into the clouds and never touched ground again. As the days stretched into weeks, speculation grew. The most common theory was a tragic fall. Glacier's high country is full of hidden hazards, steep drop-offs concealed by vegetation, loose stones, snowfields with soft spots that can collapse underfoot. If the brothers slipped into a ravine or fell from a cliff, their bodies might have been hidden beyond view, or carried downhill by meltwater, or pinned beneath debris. Another possibility was weather. Although they left in sunshine, Glacier frequently produces sudden storms. A wall of fog or a burst of rain could erase the trail in minutes. Hypothermia was a real risk, especially for hikers travelling light and trying to cover long distances before dark. A more unnerving theory circulated at the time as well: foul play. Prohibition was in full effect, and bootlegging routes were known to cut across wilderness areas. Some locals wondered if the brothers had crossed paths with smugglers who didn't want to be seen. But investigators found no evidence of violence. No disturbed ground, no blood, no broken belongings. Nothing pointed to an encounter with other people. The brothers' mother refused to give up. She travelled to Montana herself to meet with rangers, questioning guides, reviewing maps, and walking portions of the trail. She wrote emotional letters to federal authorities asking for renewed efforts. Months passed without answers. Eventually she returned to Chicago alone. In early 1925, the family printed and distributed 25,000 missing posters across the region and offered a substantial reward for information. It didn't help. Not a single viable lead surfaced. Not one item connected to the brothers was ever recovered. By spring, searchers and park officials reached the same conclusion. Whatever had happened that day in August, both brothers were gone. Somewhere in the high and silent country between the chalet and the lake, Glacier had swallowed them whole. The case soon became one of the park's earliest and most enduring mysteries. Rangers referenced it for years as an example of how easily even experienced, educated hikers could disappear in the backcountry. The story was retold often enough that it became part of park lore, passed down like a cautionary tale to new staff, and later shared in articles that revisited unsolved disappearances from the early days of the park. Today, hikers still walk the same stretch of trail the Whitehead brothers started on that morning. The scenery is just as striking. Steep ridges rising sharply on both sides, open valleys glowing in the sun, distant peaks covered in snow even when the lower trails are warm. In some places, the path narrows so much that a step to the side leads directly into open air. In others, the forest thickens, blocking sound and sight beyond a few dozen feet. More than a century later, the landscape hasn't changed much. The mystery hasn't either. What remains are the brothers' last letters, their final postcard, and the simple truth that two young men walked into Glacier's high country on a summer morning and never walked out. Their disappearance became the first of many similar stories in the park, setting the tone for a region where beauty and danger share the same space, and where even well-prepared hikers can vanish without leaving a single trace behind. The solo climb that never ended, W. Cosby Bell on Mount Brown. A morning of promise in the summer of 1933 found W. Cosby Bell standing at the base of Mount Brown in what is today Glacier National Park, Montana. The granite peaks rose around him, the mountain air crisp despite the August heat, and his pack strapped tight with the essentials for a day's climb. No one foresaw that he would become one of the park's earliest and most haunting mysteries. Bell was a young man accustomed to rugged terrain. Although detailed records of his background are thin, the fact that he took on Mount Brown's slopes speaks to a certain confidence in his abilities. In July of 1933, he set out from a lodge in the park intending what seemed a straightforward ascent. The trail was known, though remote. The vistas were sublime, the risk, by the standards of the time, acceptable. Visitors to Glacier in the era accepted that the mountains were wild and sometimes unforgiving. He left early. The morning sun glinted on patches of snow still clinging to the ridges. Streams spilled into valleys below. Ridge after ridge stretched out ahead of him, the world narrowing into rock, sky and trail. For Bell, the goal was simple: summit Mount Brown, then descend and return before nightfall. He was seen that morning, boots on rock, making steady progress. Yet the mountain had its own will. Glacier National Park in the early 1930s lacked the developed infrastructure of later years. Trails were sometimes faint, signage minimal. Weather could change without warning. Afternoon thunderstorms could sweep in from the west, and snowfields high above could shift or soften under the weight of a human foot. By late afternoon, Bell should have been on his descent, but he did not emerge. When hours passed and the lodge staff and rangers heard nothing, an initial search was mounted. Teams followed his planned route, scanning slopes and talus fields. They checked ridges and crevasses. They looked for a collapsed snow bridge, a downed hiker, a scarf caught on a bush. What they found was only silence. Days became weeks. The search extended. They deployed more rangers and guides familiar with the rock and ice, but nothing was recovered. No pack, no water bottle, no fragment of clothing. No evidence that Bell had reached the summit. No sign he'd slipped off the trail. The mystery deepened. What had happened to him? One possibility was a fall. Mount Brown's terrain is steep. A misstep could send a climber tumbling down hundreds of feet. Loose rock, hidden ledges, hidden snowfields, all could conspire. If Bell had slipped into a narrow crevasse or fallen into a hidden canyon, his body might have been carried by meltwater or trapped beneath boulders unreachable by searchers. The mountain might simply have swallowed him. Another possibility was exposure. Even in July, conditions at higher elevation in Glacier can shift. A sudden storm could bring hail or sleet. Fog could obscure the trail entirely. If Bell had been delayed on his descent, darkness could have fallen while he was still above treeline. Equipment in that era was lighter, maps less detailed. In these mountains, when the day ends with a hiker off the trail, things turn grim quickly. The ranger reports from 1933 note the growing frustration. He may have been lost on the mountain itself, one record states. The decision was made to suspend the search when snow began to fall, a grim sign that nature was reclaiming the scene. The mountain closed in again. The hope of finding Bell alive faded, then vanished. The official conclusion read simply, missing, presumed dead. What remains is the haunting visual of the trail he never returned on. The scree fields beneath Mount Brown, the narrow ridgelines that lead above the timberline, the snow patches that reflect the sky like mirrors, all remain unchanged. Hikers today pass along those same corridors, ears tuned to wind, aware of how deeply the terrain can swallow even the prepared. In the years since, Bell's case has taken on symbolic weight. It stands alongside other unsolved disappearances in the park, part of a larger pattern that reminds visitors that wilderness does not always yield its secrets. The newspaper of the era reported the event not as a sensational story, but as a cautionary one. A capable man, ambitious goal, remote terrain, and then nothing. The mountain kept its counsel. Some have speculated that he may have reached the summit late and then, in descending, missed the approved route. Others believe he may have bypassed the formal trail entirely in search of a shortcut. The problem is, no gear or tracks ever confirmed either scenario. Without a body, without even a shred of his pack, the narrative is fractured. The only certainty is absence. There is a tradition of memory in Glacier, rangers who recall. One guide said decades later, "To this day we pull up to that slope and remember Bell's name. That ridge has claimed others too." His case became part of the mountain's unspoken ledger. Visitors are told, stay on trail, watch the weather, respect the terrain, and they're reminded that in the high country even a single misstep can be final. The wilderness vanishing of W. Cosby Bell is not widely known outside Montana Park circles, yet it resonates strongly for those who know it. A solitary figure heading up a mountain and disappearing without trace becomes a form of myth, but one grounded in fact. The dates, the search, the terrain, all documented. The lack of resolution remains. What does it mean walking the same paths he once did? The stone trail markers may show the way, but the mountain itself is indifferent. It challenges, it conceals, it moves in silence. A boulder shifts, a snowfield gives way, a cloud descends, a well-equipped man can vanish. Bell vanished. At the mountaineering lodge where he began, the logs still list his name. The date still marks his climb. The entry stands out. W. Cosby Bell, August 1933, missing. Years later, the memory lingers. Guests glance at the ledger. They compare the weather, the route, the assumptions. They imagine the last minutes before the trail ended and the mountain consumed him. When you climb Mount Brown today, you see the ridgelines stretching north and south, the ridges that dip and rise, summits jutting into open air. You see the snowfields, you hear the wind in the high pines, and if you pause and think, you remember that someone took these same steps and then simply disappeared. The landscape stayed silent, the search ended, and only the question remained: what happened? The disappearance of W. Cosby Bell is a chapter in Glacier's history of missing people. It is a reminder that nature maintains its power, at times unrecognized, often underestimated. 2 decades later, the park would record more vanishings, over the decades, still more. But Bell's case stands early, in 1933, in an era when rescue, communication, and trail infrastructure were fledgling. His vanishing marked the mountain's capacity to defeat even the determined. As day becomes evening and the shadows stretch across Mount Brown's slopes, the mind drifts to that final climb, the solo ascent, the final view that he may have taken, and then nothing beyond. A man enters high country and the mountain takes him. The trail finishes, the story stops, and the question hangs in the silent air. The doctor who walked into the park and never returned, Dr. F.H. Lumley. It began with something simple, a name written neatly on a registration card at a quiet backcountry camp in Glacier National Park. F.H. Lumley, a young physician from Ohio, 27 years old, travelling alone and planning a long hike across some of the park's most remote terrain. He signed in without hurry, left his pack resting beside the cabin door, and stepped back into the morning air with the confidence of someone used to responsibility. Dr. Frederick H. Lumley had come to Montana during the summer of 1934, hoping to spend several days exploring. He was known as a careful man, thoughtful, disciplined. His colleagues in Ohio later said he wasn't the type to take needless risks, but Glacier in the 1930s was an entirely different world compared to the national park we know today. Trails were faint, markers were sparse, and information was limited to what rangers and guides shared verbally. Once a person stepped into the high country, they were on their own. On August 13th, Lumley planned to hike from the Goat Haunt area toward the Many Glacier region, a route of roughly 17 miles that crossed ridges, valleys, riverbeds, and long stretches of isolated forest. It wasn't considered an impossible trek, but it was demanding and required timing, awareness, and respect for the terrain. Early in the morning, he left camp carrying only what he needed for a long day on foot. He was last seen walking steadily along the trail heading south. Witnesses said he moved with purpose and didn't appear concerned about weather or conditions. It was a clear morning, the kind that turns the mountains blue and sharp against the sky. The wind was calm, nothing suggested danger. By late afternoon, he should have been nearing the Many Glacier area. By evening, he should have checked in, but he never arrived. At first, lodge staff assumed he had simply been delayed. Perhaps he had stopped to rest or taken a slower route, but the next morning, when he still had not appeared, rangers were alerted. His luggage was found sitting neatly at the hotel, untouched. Clothing, personal items, everything arranged exactly as he had left it. What was missing was the man himself. The search started quietly, with rangers following the main trail he should have used. When they found no sign, the effort grew. Teams spread into side valleys, climbed ridgelines, and followed drainage channels where a hiker might slip or fall. They checked possible shortcuts, examined steep slopes, and questioned every traveller who had been anywhere near the route that day. No footprints, no broken branches, no clothing, no pack, no body. It was as if Dr. Lumley had walked into the wilderness and simply dissolved into it. The disappearance baffled people not only because it happened in a remote place, but because it involved someone who was expected to be aware of danger. A physician was assumed to be cautious, deliberate, and quick to recognize symptoms of exhaustion, dehydration, or altitude stress. Yet none of that helped him in the Montana backcountry. As days passed, the searchers began considering what might have gone wrong. The first theory was the most obvious: a fall. The route crossed steep terrain where one misstep could send a person tumbling out of view. Glacier's slopes are full of hidden hazards: loose rock fields, sudden drop-offs, deep vegetation that hides unstable ground. A fall into a ravine or narrow chute might leave no visible sign from above. Another possibility was weather. Glacier is unpredictable even in summer. A sudden storm could have rolled in from the west, bringing fog or cold rain. Clear mornings can become dangerous afternoons. If a cloud bank dropped over the ridge, visibility could drop to a few feet. A hiker caught in that, even an experienced one, might stray off the trail without realizing it. Searchers also considered fatigue. A 70-mile route at elevation, especially on rugged terrain, pushes even strong hikers. If Lumley slipped behind schedule, he might have been forced into nightfall on high ground without shelter. Temperatures fall quickly at elevation, and hypothermia does not need freezing conditions to take hold. Back in Ohio, Lumley's disappearance made headlines. A missing doctor was not common news, especially one lost in a national park far from home. His family reached out to the Park Service repeatedly, seeking updates. Local communities in Montana took notice as well. The disappearance of a visitor carried a different weight. It made people talk, speculate, and question how such a thing could happen without leaving evidence. Some locals believed he may have tried to take a shortcut between valleys and simply lost his bearings. Others whispered about areas along that trail known for unstable ground, places where snowfields cover gaps in rock during early summer. A hiker who steps on one at the wrong time can break through and vanish into a hidden chamber or slide zone. No sign of him was ever recovered. In the following months, park personnel continued checking the route whenever they passed through the region. Whenever snow melted or when slides exposed new ground, the area was re-examined. But nothing emerged, not even the smallest fragment of gear. With each season, the likelihood of finding answers faded. For Glacier's communities, the case added another layer to the park's reputation. By the 1930s, stories of missing hikers were already part of conversation, but Lumley's disappearance made it clear that education, experience and status did nothing to alter the wilderness's indifference. People who came from cities, from professions of certainty and control, were just as vulnerable as anyone else. Visitors walking through the Many Glacier Lodge today can still see the old registers from that era. On one of those pages is Lumley's name, a line of ink that marks the beginning of a journey he never completed. Some rangers still tell the story quietly, pointing out the ruggedness of the Goat Haunt region and describing how easy it is for a single mistake to erase a person from view. Standing at the trailhead where Lumley started, the landscape looks open and inviting, towering peaks, wide valleys, clear air. But as the trail rises, it narrows. Forest gives way to rock, rock gives way to scree, and then to high ridges where sound is swallowed by wind. It becomes clearer how someone could step into this world and never leave a trace behind. All that remains of Dr. F.H. Lumley is a name on a card, a bag left behind in a hotel room, and a stretch of wild terrain that holds every answer and reveals none. Empty boat on Kintla Lake, the fisherman who never came home. The story begins with the quiet sound of water against a wooden hull. Not the sound of trouble, not the sound of panic, just the steady rhythm of a boat drifting on a calm lake in the far northwest corner of Glacier National Park. Kintla Lake, long and narrow, is surrounded by steep mountains that rise like walls, shutting the area off from the rest of the world. In 1950, it was one of the most isolated places in the entire park, a place where visitors were few and the wilderness was still largely untouched. 3 men arrived there that summer. They came for fishing, for the peace of high Montana, and for a day on the water. Their names were recorded in local accounts, but the details that mattered most were simple. 3 men in a boat heading out onto one of Glacier's most remote lakes, planning to return before nightfall. They pushed off from shore in the morning. Conditions were clear. There were no warnings, no storms, no reasons to think a day on Kintla Lake would become one of the park's enduring mysteries. Kintla Lake stretches nearly 7 miles, hemmed in by ridges that drop sharply into the water. It is deep and cold. Even in summer, meltwater from the high country keeps the temperature low enough to numb a swimmer within minutes. The mountains funnel wind down the length of the lake, sometimes creating sudden waves even on days that begin still. The 3 men rowed out, heading toward deeper water. People at the campground saw them leave. Nothing seemed unusual. For hours, Kintla Lake remained as quiet as ever. When the boat didn't return by dusk, concern began to grow. It was out of character for fishermen not to come back before dark, especially in an area where nighttime cold falls quickly. By the following morning, rangers had been notified. They found the boat adrift on the water, empty. The discovery of an empty boat is one of the most unsettling images in any disappearance. It suggests something happened fast, something none of the men had time to prepare for. Inside the boat, investigators found nothing that pointed clearly to what had gone wrong. No signs of struggle, no torn gear, no fishing equipment wedged in an odd place. It was as if the men had simply vanished over the side. Soon after, a search began. Rangers used smaller boats to comb the shoreline. On foot, they pushed through dense brush, scanning the edges of the lake for footprints or clothing. The water's clarity deceived them. It looked like you could see a long way down, but the depth swallowed everything. Kintla Lake is fed by cold, heavy glacial runoff. Objects sink fast, bodies sink faster. Eventually, one body surfaced. Cold water preserves, but it also holds secrets tightly. The recovered man was identified, confirming that the group had met with some kind of disaster on the lake. But the other 2 men were missing. Their families waited for word. Rangers expanded the search farther down the shoreline, deeper into the backcountry, and across the water with every tool they had. They searched for days, then weeks. No trace of the remaining 2 fishermen was ever found. Because one body was recovered, investigators could at least determine that an accident on the water was the most likely explanation. But the specifics remained impossible to pin down. Theories developed, each plausible yet impossible to confirm. One possibility was sudden wind. Kintla Lake is notorious for powerful gusts that can appear without warning, blowing down from Kintla Peak and the surrounding ridges. A calm morning can become hazardous in minutes. A small rowboat, especially in the early 1950s, would have been no match for a hard crosswind. If a wave struck the boat at the wrong angle, or if the men shifted weight at the wrong time, The boat could easily have tipped. Another possibility was cold water shock. Even a strong swimmer can lose muscle control almost instantly when falling into glacial water. Panic sets in quickly. The cold steals movement, breath, and strength within seconds. If the men were thrown overboard even close to shore, the lake's temperature alone could have made survival impossible. But there were other possibilities too. A loose oar, a snagged fishing line, a sudden attempt to retrieve dropped gear, a moment of imbalance, even an argument. Anything that caused one or more men to stand suddenly in a narrow boat could cause it to capsize. And once in the water, the lake would have taken over. What troubled many, even at the time, was the fact that two bodies never resurfaced. It wasn't uncommon for remains to stay down in deep alpine lakes, but the absence of any physical trace, not clothing, not equipment, not even fishing gear washed ashore, left room for speculation. Did the men try to swim for a distant section of land? Did they become separated in the water? Did the current pull them toward the deeper northern section of the lake, where retrieval was nearly impossible? Kintla Lake in 1950 was far more remote than it is today. The road was rough, almost an afterthought. There were no large rescue boats, no sonar systems, no aerial searches, equipped with modern technology. Rangers worked with what they had: binoculars, patience, and physical endurance. And as the days passed, the hope of recovering more evidence faded. The families of the missing men waited in the campground during the search. Small details from those days survived in local memory: quiet conversations near the water's edge, long hours staring out at the lake, hoping something would surface. The one recovered body offered little comfort. The lack of answers only deepened the pain. Eventually the search was scaled back. Rangers noted the depth of the lake, the steepness of the underwater terrain, and the very real possibility that the men were simply beyond recovery. The unsolved portion of the story began then and continues still. Today, people who visit Kintla Lake often remark on its beauty first: the stillness, the mirror-like surface, the mountains reflected in long streaks of blue. But those who know the history of glaciers missing sometimes see something else when they look across that quiet water. They see the empty boat. They see the place where 3 men rowed out and only one ever came back. When the wind moves along the surface of Kintla Lake, it carries a faint, restless sound, a reminder that water, like mountains, holds its own mysteries. And once something slips beneath that cold, dark surface, it may never return. Letters from the unknown. The disappearance of Nylene K. Marshall. On a late June afternoon in 1983, a family outing in the forest near Helena, Montana was simply meant to be time together. A picnic on a creek, birds overhead, children playing beside water and pines. Among them was 4-year-old Nylene K. Marshall. She was small, curious, barefoot, dressed in shorts and a t-shirt. She wandered ahead with other children. The creek was a beaver-dammed flow in the Elkhorn Mountains of the Helena National Forest, quiet, remote. Then she vanished. The time was about 4 p.m. She was at Maupin Creek, playing near the beaver dams. 2 other children walked ahead. When they turned to look back, Nylene was gone. The moment of disappearance happened in a place where help was distant, where thick forest and steep slopes surround even easy-looking terrain. Initial searches erupted quickly but produced nothing. No sign of the little girl, no clothing, no shoe, no footprint. The woods simply held their silence. In the days after, the local sheriff's office, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and hundreds of volunteers combed the area. They searched creeks, old mine shafts, forest clearings, ridge tops. They trained dogs, they drained ponds, they followed every possible trail, yet in that challenging terrain, with rain weakening scent trails and dense thickets hiding paths, nothing led to her. The search was massive, but the outcome was the same: absence. At first, law enforcement considered that Nylene could have wandered from the group and become lost. The forest is vast. A child can cross out of sight in seconds. But alternative evidence emerged quickly. Children at the scene reported seeing a man wearing a jogging suit near the beaver dams just before Nylene vanished, and they said he'd spoken briefly with her. The man was never identified. His presence shifted the investigation from lost child to possible abduction. Over the next 2 years, the case took a chilling turn. On November 27, 1985, an anonymous phone call came to a missing children agency, a voice claiming knowledge. In early 1986, a typewritten letter arrived, postmarked Madison, Wisconsin. The writer claimed he had picked up a girl named Kay from the Helena area, claimed to be raising her, said she travelled with him across the United States, Canada, and even to the United Kingdom, and that she was homeschooled. In these communications, he seemed aware of details about the case that had not been publicly released, leading investigators to conclude he was not merely a prankster. In the letter, the writer said the girl was safe, that he loved her and could not let her go, though he acknowledged that her family missed her. The letter also introduced disturbing elements. It claimed sexual abuse, yet insisted the girl was cared for and trusted him. The voice behind the letters placed calls from public phone booths in the Madison area. Investigators traced several calls to payphones near pharmacies in Edgerton, Wisconsin. Despite these leads, the man was never identified. No witness came forward to place Nalene in travel with him. No confirmed photograph. No trace of documents. Back in Montana, the disappearance cast a long shadow in the small town near Clancy where the Marshalls lived. The mother, Nancy, the stepfather, Kim, the siblings, they all were drawn into the investigation. The fact that this involved a 4-year-old pulled at community's sense of safety. It challenged assumptions. What seemed like a simple picnic outing in the forest had become the site of a nightmare. The local community helped. Church groups, search and rescue volunteers, families from the area poured into the Elkhorn Mountains. They believed in the rescue. They believed in the return. But each heavy step into the forest came back heavy with nothing. Each nightfall ended with the same question. Where was Nalene? Because of the letters and calls, tips flowed in from across the country. Some claimed to have seen her in shopping centres. Others reported that she was living abroad. None held proof. One composite sketch of the jogging suit man was drawn up. Another photograph surfaced of a girl resembling Nalene in another investigation, but she was ruled out. Efforts, private and public, continued, yet every piece of evidence pointed to absence. The case held the dual nature of a wilderness vanish and a small-town cold case. On one hand, the location, deep forest, beaver ponds, narrow meadows, old mining roads, reminded everyone that the Montana wilderness could swallow a person. On the other hand, the community, and indeed the nation, was riveted by the disappearance of a little girl, by the possibility of abduction, by the letters from someone who claimed not just to know but to control the situation. Families watched and waited. From the first hours, the rescue teams knew the terrain would work against them. The woods near Maupin Creek are thick, the slopes steep, the ground uneven. Rain fell during the search, washing away tracks. Shadows lengthened quickly. Old mine shafts dotted the area. Every possible hiding place was considered. Every creek looked like a possible route of escape or entry, but nothing definitive emerged. For the Marshalls, life changed. The picnic they had expected turned into the day they lost their daughter. The younger siblings now played in silence. The mother moved with the constant ache of missing. A community that once shared laughter in the forest now shared mourning. The letters from the unknown man were both a lifeline and a reminder. Someone claimed to know what had happened, yet the family remained powerless to act. The letters' promise of worldwide travel and hidden life only intensified the torment of not knowing. Law enforcement records show that by the late 1980s the case had grown cold. Tips were still logged, but resources shifted. Investigators emphasized that the lack of physical evidence hampered prosecution. A confessed killer even emerged in 1991 claiming he had taken Nalene and disposed of her in an old mineshaft near Helena. He led authorities to none of the promised evidence. He recanted. No remains were found. The community grew weary. Yet despite the time, the case remained active. Investigators still labelled it as unsolved. The wilderness hadn't changed. The forest still stands silent. The creek still flows. The beaver dams still hold. The children's footprints were long gone. The letters and calls remain the eerie echo of someone's claim of control over a child's fate. For the people who followed the story, it bent the notion of safety in small towns and in nature. A 4-year-old playing near water and trees, in daylight, under adult supervision, yet gone. The anonymity of the person behind the letters, the geography of a place where tracking is difficult, where forest swallows sound and time steals traces. The phrase "someone bore her away" weighed heavily. Walking through the Helena National Forest today, you might come across Maupin Creek, the beaver dams, trees heavy with summer verdure, shadows stretching across the picnic ground. An approaching adult might recall that day in 1983. They might see warnings in the serene beauty. They might reflect on how swiftly normal turned to missing. The forest holds the moment in stillness. The interplay of wilderness and small-town drama in the case of Nylene K. Marshall remains potent. It reminds us that nature can create the conditions for disappearances, but human actions, letters, claims, shadows can deepen the mystery. One child vanished, one forest bore witness, one unknown voice claimed possession, and the town waited. The woman who walked away from a crash, Patricia Meehan. The last known photograph of Patricia Meehan wasn't taken in a studio or on a holiday or at a family gathering. It was taken on the night she disappeared, captured by the other driver involved in the crash that changed everything. In the flash of a camera, Patricia stood beside the wrecked vehicles on a dark Montana road, her face turned away, her posture distant, as if she were already leaving the world behind. On April 20th, 1989, just outside Circle, Montana, the evening was quiet. Highway 200 stretched through open prairie, one of those long, unbroken roads where headlights can be seen miles away. Patricia Meehan was driving alone. She was 37 years old, originally from Pennsylvania, working in Montana as a ranch hand. Her friends described her as gentle, sensitive, and introspective. In the weeks before the crash, she had been struggling emotionally and had recently spoken of feeling out of balance. Some interpreted it as exhaustion. Others sensed something deeper. Around 8:15 p.m., Patricia's car drifted across the center line and collided head-on with another vehicle. Inside the other car were a young woman and her parents. They were startled but not seriously harmed. What happened next became one of the strangest acts ever witnessed in a Montana disappearance. Instead of checking on the others or responding to their voices, Patricia stepped out of her car slowly and walked into the prairie. No fear, no confusion. According to the family involved in the crash, she didn't run or stagger. She walked calmly, as though following something only she could see. Within seconds, she was swallowed by darkness. Emergency responders arrived quickly, and a search began. It continued through the night, then into the next day, and then into the following week. Hundreds of volunteers, local ranchers on horseback, sheriff's deputies, pilots, and dog teams combed the area. The land was endless. Rolling grassland, barbed wire fences, old cattle trails, drained creek beds. Searchers swept everything systematically, expecting to find someone cold, injured, confused, but findable. They found nothing. The next twist in the case arrived when investigators spoke to the occupants of the other car. One of them had taken a photograph of the crash scene moments after it happened. In that photograph, Patricia appears in the frame, distant from both vehicles, staring into the night. Her expression is unreadable. To many, the image became symbolic of the entire mystery, someone present in body yet already gone in mind. In the days after the disappearance, law enforcement focused on the crash area. They searched abandoned sheds, culverts, and livestock pens. They checked abandoned farmhouses and windbreaks where someone might shelter. The pattern of tracks in the soil suggested she had walked or wandered in wide arcs before traces stopped. There were no signs of foul play, no signs of a second vehicle picking her up, no belongings left behind. Then came the sightings. Months after she disappeared, calls began coming from across Montana, then across the Dakotas, then across the country. People reported seeing a woman who looked just like Patricia, sometimes hitchhiking, sometimes sitting alone in restaurants, sometimes working odd jobs under different names. The reports stretched from Washington state to Minnesota to Oklahoma to Illinois. Nearly 100 sightings were logged over the next few years. Some witnesses described her as dazed but calm. Others said she seemed purposeful, as though travelling somewhere specific. A few said she looked like she wanted to talk but never did. One police officer in Washington state reported stopping a woman who matched Patricia's description, but she walked away before he could fully identify her. The possibility that she was alive, drifting through towns and highways, turned the case into a ghost trail. Each sighting felt like a fresh lead, yet none could be confirmed. Law enforcement interviewed dozens of people, watched mall surveillance tapes, visited shelters, and checked employment records. Each lead ended at the same dead end. No proof she was ever there. Her family, particularly her parents, followed the sightings across the country. They travelled thousands of miles, distributing photos, talking to locals, leaving contact numbers. Patricia had grown up in a close family, riding horses and spending time outdoors. She had a gentle personality. Her disappearance left them shaken, searching for answers that never came. Investigators began considering deeper psychological explanations. Patricia had been struggling before the crash. She had left her job, expressed anxiety, and visited a friend for support shortly before driving that night. Some speculated she may have entered a state of dissociation after the accident, walking away in shock, then continuing on foot until she reached a road, a farm, a passing driver, or a shelter. Such a state could lead someone to adopt a transient life, avoiding identification, living on the margins, drifting from place to place. Another possibility was hypothermia, but temperatures that night were not fatally low, and the extensive ground search did not turn up remains, something that typically would have happened in open prairie. Some early theories even suggested that Patricia might have returned to her childhood tendencies of retreat during emotional stress. But those who knew her doubted she would intentionally cut off contact. She had no history of running away from problems. She had no reason to disappear on purpose. As sightings continued, the case expanded beyond Montana. Truckers called in reports of a quiet woman matching her description at rest stops. Hotel clerks claimed to have checked her in days earlier. A waitress said she'd served her coffee. A woman in the Great Lakes region insisted she'd spoken to someone who looked and sounded like Patricia, but the woman left before police arrived. Every possible sighting generated hope, and every unconfirmed report delivered new heartache. By the mid-1990s, the case had become national news. Many Americans recognized Patricia's photograph. Orange-brown hair, calm features, a gentle expression. Age-progressed sketches were released. The sightings slowly decreased but never fully stopped. No bank cards were ever used. No employment records surfaced. No legal documents appeared. In the world of modern disappearances, where digital footprints reveal almost everything, Patricia left none. It was as though she stepped out of one life and into a place beyond ordinary tracking, a life of movement, anonymity, or silence. What lingers most in the case is the image of her walking away from the crash. The road was flat, the night quiet, the horizon endless. She didn't panic, she didn't scream, she didn't ask for help. She simply walked into the prairie, as if answering a call no one else could hear. The psychological angle, the decades of sightings, the absence of evidence, every part of her story sits in a space between accident and intention, between trauma and mystery, between presence and disappearance. Patricia Meehan walked away after the crash, leaving behind a wrecked car, a shaken family, and a single photograph that captured the last moment she was unquestionably seen. And from that moment onward, she became a trail of shadows across America, always almost found, always just out of reach. The graduate student who never got home, Susan Elizabeth Pearson. It was early spring in Missoula, Montana. Snow softened in the sun. The campus of the University of Montana hummed with students. Dr. Susan Elizabeth Pearson, age 30, was walking those same paths, preparing for what should have been an important day, the submission of her doctoral thesis and the administration of a final exam to her students. Then she vanished. Susan Pearson was born in Portland, Oregon, in October 1935. She came from a family with a strong background. Her father a prominent insurance agent, her grandfather a state senator. But Susan was forging her own path, an instructor in business administration at the University of Montana, doctoral student, educated, articulate, responsible. In March 1966, she was in the final leg of her academic journey when something went off course. On March 13, 1966, she was last seen on campus. She had just met friends, appeared as usual. She was seen wearing slacks, a green 3/4 length car coat with plaid lining, and 2 diamond rings on her right hand. Then she disappeared. She never arrived to administer the exam she was scheduled to oversee. Her apartment remained undisturbed. Her teapot still sat on the stove. Her porch light, one she typically left on in the evening, was off. The next day, her car was found abandoned in a business district of Missoula, its contents still inside. Her purse, car keys, identification, but no money, no personal explanation, no trace of Susan herself. Authorities launched a missing person investigation. Family and local police combed the area. They examined her home for signs of struggle. They interviewed colleagues, friends, students. One friend, a nightclub singer she had visited the night before, recalled that Susan seemed nervous, agitated, just a different Sue, she said. Susan had reportedly spoken about leaving and starting anew. Investigators noted that she'd missed picking up 2 paychecks totaling about $1,200. Money unclaimed and uncashed. A woman teaching business, writing a thesis, moving towards stability. Why leave it all behind? The campus environment seemed safe. Small classes, familiar faces, quiet town life. Yet Susan vanished in that very space. Her car, locked and intact, sat downtown. No witnesses reported seeing her leave town. No traffic cameras existed. In 1966, the technology was minimal. But the lack of evidence sparked suspicion. Foul play was considered. Investigators examined threats. 2 male students in one of her classes had reportedly expressed dissatisfaction with grades and allegedly threatened to wreck her car. These threats were recalled years later during private investigations. One private detective said he found no concrete link to foul action, but the memory of threatened revenge remained part of the record. The case file noted that there were no signs of her boarding a plane or train, no credit card charges, no known activity beyond downtown Missoula. In November 1970, bones were discovered in the Blue Mountain region south of Missoula. An arm and hand, thought possibly to belong to Susan, raised hopes. The sheriff noted the bones may have been years old and located in terrain consistent with a lost person location. But pathologists later determined the bones belonged to a bear, not human remains. Still, the possibility that she might have been lost beyond reach persisted in the files. Over time, Susan Pearson's case became one of Montana's oldest unsolved disappearances. Each year that passed without resolution deepened the mystery. Her family held on to hope. University colleagues still remembered her. Missoula residents spoke quietly of the young woman who vanished between classroom and town. Many theories circulated. One was voluntary disappearance. Susan had reportedly talked about starting over. A person with her means and intelligence could theoretically choose to vanish, but she left behind her identity, her money, her home. She didn't withdraw with intention of starting a new life, so the voluntary scenario seemed incomplete. Another theory was suicide. Some friends said she appeared anxious and distressed in the days before her disappearance, yet her car and personal belongings remained untouched. And the campus life she left seemed inconsistent with a walkaway decision. A third theory was foul play, intervention by another person. The threats from students, the abandoned car downtown, the swift disappearance all point to a possibility that someone committed an act of violence and covered it up. Given the small town and limited investigative tools of the era, those possibilities remain plausible but unproven. Investigators also noted her doctoral work was due and her commitments were substantial. She was balancing teaching, research and personal life. Stress, perhaps, was real. On March 12th, she visited her friend and appeared uneasy. The next morning, she left for the campus expecting to fulfill an academic role, but she never did. The quiet routine of lecture and exam dissolved into a mystery. The environment of Missoula played its part. The university campus sits near the Clark Fork River, with wooded areas, suburban streets, small businesses, bars, students coming and going late. A person could blend in, cross into town or woods, disappear into shadows. In the 1960s, law enforcement staffing was modest, records minimal, missing person alerts not the public priority they are today. Susan vanished in a world with fewer cameras, less interstate data sharing, and less emphasis on adult missing persons. She simply walked out of a life into notice and then into fog. In the years since, private investigators reopened leads. Some looked into the Blue Mountain ridgelines, into the river corridors, into possible hitchhiking or human trafficking. None produced a credible trace. One private detective said that after 6 decades, the typical signs of life, bank records, pension withdrawals, criminal records, remain absent. No usage of her name, no known alias, no confirmed photograph beyond 1966. The small-town dimension is central. This was not a park trail or remote canyon. This was a woman teaching university students in the heart of Missoula. Students remember her as composed, professional, slightly reserved. Her disappearance shook this community's assumption that academic life and safe towns were immune to such vanishings. Her apartment at 160 Strand Avenue stood quiet. Visitors noted the tea kettle sat mid-boiling, the porch light off, details those close to Susan felt signalled abruptness. Her car's abandonment confirmed the abrupt end of a routine. The abandoning of everyday life is one of the things investigators point to when assessing whether a disappearance had foul involvement. Money and personal items are usually taken if someone leaves by choice. Media coverage at the time appeared in local papers. "You woman instructor missing nearly week," read early headlines. Search efforts were reported, private efforts followed. The case file continued to grow rust around the edges. Each year, archives noted the disappearance as missing unsolved. The state of Montana noted Susan Pearson's case among the oldest active missing person files. Her name appears in lists of people who vanished mysteriously from safe places, from institutions of learning, where disappearance felt at the time unthinkable. For students walking through the university's corridor today, the name Susan Pearson occasionally comes up in conversation about cases unsolved, lives interrupted, and environments considered safe that proved not so. Her story challenges the idea that vanishings only happen in wilderness or isolated roads. Her case reminds us they happen in familiar spaces, among scholars, among routines, among expectations. In the absence of closure, the details remain. A green coat with plaid lining, 2 diamond rings on her right hand, a now decades-old car found downtown with purse and keys inside, but no trace of Susan, and the day on which she walked away. The campus was alive. The city of Missoula quiet. A woman with a future dissolved into nothing visible. 6 decades later, her absence remains. The students she would have taught, the work she might yet have done, the life she planned, all lost to a day that should have been ordinary. And the search goes on. The missing priest of Ronan, Father John Patrick Kerrigan. It started with a routine transfer, a priest moving to a new parish, a new town, a new assignment. Nothing unusual. Clergy were moved often, sometimes with little notice, sometimes with no real explanation. And when Father John Patrick Kerrigan arrived in Ronan, Montana in July of 1984, it appeared to be just another quiet handoff within the church. He'd served in several towns before: Butte, Hamilton, Conrad, Anaconda, and now Ronan was simply the next one. 10 days later, he was gone. On the evening of July 20th, 1984, Father Kerrigan ate dinner at a local restaurant. A waitress remembered him because he seemed polite and calm. He paid his bill and left on foot, heading toward his new residence, a modest parish home near the town's centre. That was the last confirmed sighting of him alive. The following day, parishioners noticed he hadn't shown up for morning mass. Calls to his residence went unanswered. People assumed he'd overslept or taken a walk. But by afternoon, concerns grew. It wasn't like a priest, especially one new to the parish, to simply disappear without notifying anyone. By evening, the police were informed. A missing person report was filed. Ronan in the 1980s was a small, close community on the Flathead Reservation. People knew their neighbours. Word travelled fast. When authorities located Kerrigan's car, a brown 1982 Buick, it sent a ripple through town. The car was abandoned at a pull-out along a rural highway just outside Ronan. Inside were his wallet, his Bible, and personal papers. Outside, scattered on the ground, were his clothing items, stained with blood. The discovery shocked investigators. A missing priest was one thing. A missing priest with bloody clothes and an abandoned car was something else entirely. A search began immediately. Local police, tribal officers, sheriff's deputies, and volunteers combed ditches, creek beds, and the wooded country around the highway. They knocked on doors, questioned residents, and retraced Kerrigan's steps through town. But nothing led to him. His body was never found. As the search played out, the community whispered. A crime against a priest felt unthinkable in a small Montana town, and people wanted explanations. What few knew then, but would become clear years later, was that this disappearance did not sit in isolation. It sat on the edge of a much wider and darker story. In the decades that followed, investigative reporting revealed that Father Kerrigan had been associated with multiple past allegations of sexual abuse in other assignments. Records later unearthed indicated that he'd been moved from parish to parish just as accusations surfaced. And his sudden transfer to Ronan came almost immediately after yet another complaint in his previous location. People in Ronan didn't know that in 1984. They only knew that a priest had vanished. The small-town investigation unfolded the way many such cases do. Steady work, limited leads, and a growing sense that something wasn't adding up. There were no signs of forced entry into his car, no stolen money or items, no witnesses reported hearing a struggle. Some locals said they had seen a strange man hitchhiking near the location where the car was found, but no hard connection was ever established. As the investigation stalled, outside factors began shaping the story. Journalists found patterns linking Kerrigan's disappearance to several other unsolved attacks on priests in the 1980s, particularly in the Northwest. Some cases involved priests who were themselves accused of wrongdoing. Others involved priests who seemed to have simply vanished without explanation. The threads were complicated, sensitive, and often obscured by institutional silence. In Ronan, the investigation took a quieter turn. Without a body, without a murder scene, and without any confirmed suspects, the case faded into cold case territory. The sheriff's office revisited it periodically. Files were passed down through generations of investigators. Leads came and went, but no evidence ever surfaced to reveal what actually happened that night in 1984. One of the strangest details emerged from the items found with Kerrigan's clothes. Among them was a coat hanger twisted into a loop. Some investigators believed it suggested restraint or struggle. Others thought it indicated nothing meaningful. Without context, it remained one more baffling piece in an already tangled puzzle. Meanwhile, family members of alleged victims from Kerrigan's past spoke publicly in later years, saying they believed the disappearance might have been connected to retribution or retaliation. Law enforcement never confirmed that theory. No evidence directly supported it. But the timing, coming on the heels of newly surfaced accusations, kept the speculation alive. The church provided little commentary at the time. Transfers of priests were considered internal matters. Personnel files were confidential. In the 1980s, the wider abuse scandal had not yet been exposed publicly, and the idea that church leadership might move priests quietly in response to misconduct was not widely understood. Only in the 1990s and early 2000s did this pattern become visible, prompting new scrutiny of older cases, including Kerrigan's. In Ronan, people remembered the early days of the search most clearly. The parishioners gathering in the church hall, volunteers organising grid lines across farmland, officers scanning roadside brush, and the sense of unease that settled over the community when the hunt ended with no discovery. Years later, when reporters revisited the case, they found that residents still held onto fragments of memory. Some recalled seeing priests from neighbouring towns visit Ronan during the aftermath. Others remembered hearing rumours, none of them ever proven, about someone who might have been seen talking to Kerrigan before he disappeared. But no witness ever stepped forward with confirmable information. What the community did know was this: Father John Patrick Kerrigan arrived in Ronan for a new assignment, walked through town as any newcomer would, and within days vanished into the space between two worlds, the world of a small Montana parish and the world of a national scandal not yet fully revealed. The official case remains open. His body has never been found. No suspect has ever been identified. His disappearance sits at the crossroads of personal mystery and institutional silence, of small-town life and forces far larger than the town itself. And for nearly 4 decades, the unanswered questions have lingered. The last steps Kerrigan took in Ronan, leaving the restaurant, walking the roadside, possibly heading toward his parish home, are still retraced by investigators from time to time. They look at the same stretch of asphalt, the same ditches, the same tree lines. The mountains in the distance have not changed. The quiet of the town has not changed. And somewhere between those details lies a story the small community never fully heard. One that vanished the same night the priest did. Lost on Going to the Sun, the vanishing of David Paul Wilson. The road winds along the mountainside, the famous Going to the Sun road towering above you, glaciers visible in the distance and sheer drop-offs folding into valleys below. It is one of America's most scenic drives. In July of 1963, it was also the starting point of one of the park's most baffling mysteries. A 21-year-old seasonal employee named David Paul Wilson stepped out into the high country of Glacier National Park, Montana, and disappeared. Wilson was not just another visitor. He was working in the park that summer, familiar with its trails and terrain. He'd grown up in Montana. He knew the mountains, the weather, the wilderness in a way many people did not. On July 21, 1963, he set out from the Lake McDonald mail route area, intending to climb toward the upper reaches of Going to the Sun Mountain cross-country, away from the main routes. He was last seen walking into a ridge country where glaciers met rock, snowfields lingered, and the mountains showed no mercy. His disappearance sparked one of the earliest large-scale searches in the park's history. Rangers, fellow employees, volunteers combed alpine ridges, snow bridges, and meadows. They flew plains, dropped into valleys, searched crevasses, they followed tracks, they climbed ridge lines. Yet the more they searched, the more the mountain seemed to hold its secrets tight. What makes Wilson's case especially haunting is that he vanished in a place where one would expect a competent young man to find his way. The route he chose was off-trail, but not uncommon for experienced seasonal staff. His pack, his gear, his last known location gave enough clue to suggest he climbed into the wild with intention. And yet, intention did not guarantee return. The environment around Going to the Sun Mountain in that season is rugged. Snowfields remain through summer. Rocks shift beneath feet. Late afternoon storms can sweep in when the weather looked promising in the morning. A ridge that rises cleanly can end in a hidden drop-off. A snow chalet can disappear beneath mist. None of that stopped Wilson, or at least none of that was recorded as stopping him. But one thing remains clear: he did not come back. Ranger reports from 1963 describe how searchers found his camp items, or at least some remnants on one of the ridges, a sleeping bag, an empty pack, but they could never determine if these items belonged to Wilson or if he had removed them himself. No body, no identifiable remains. The crevasses were deep and cold. A fall might lead to immediate fatality or gradual drift beneath rock and ice. Time was not on their side. Weeks passed. The park's resources at the time were limited. Communications were slower, heli searches rare, and high-altitude rescues difficult. The mountain loomed and the search gradually wound down, not with resolution, but with unanswered questions. Among theories advanced, one, that Wilson may have fallen from a ridge or slipped through a snow bridge onto hidden ice. The alpine terrain on the flank of Going to the Sun Mountain contains deep crevasses and old glacial ice. In summer, as snow melts, hazards increase. A hiker, even one familiar, can misjudge a field of snow, step through, and vanish beneath a sheet of ice or into a narrow void. That possibility haunted searchers. Another theory? He might have simply gotten lost after dark, descended into a valley where trails ended, and succumbed to exposure. The notion is not far-fetched in Glacier, a climb that takes longer than expected. Daylight fades, the temperature drops, wind picks up. The next morning, all that searchers find is an abandoned trail or a set of frozen footprints ending nowhere. In Wilson's case, the footprints stopped, the trail ended. Some speculated that he may have attempted to call for help, but the rugged terrain of that region can isolate a person entirely. Sound dies among granite ridges. Air carries differently. Even if shouts were made, they may not have travelled far. By the time search helicopters arrived, the wind and terrain may have erased any chance of hearing help. When the search officially ended, Wilson's name was added to the ledger of Glacier's Unsolved Disappearances. Ranger logs list his disappearance still as not located. The mountain didn't answer. The lake didn't hold his body. The grasses near the ridges didn't yield his gear, and so the mountain moves on, but the question remains. People who hike that route today often reflect on Wilson's story. The path from Lake McDonald toward Going to the Sun Mountain is still open, still spectacular, still inviting. But for those who know the history, the beauty comes with a reminder. Even someone who knows the land can vanish in it. Years later, park historians list Wilson alongside other missing persons whose vanishings helped refine search techniques and rescue protocols. But that doesn't give answers. Consider his age. 21, in peak condition, mountain aware. Consider his job. Seasonal park worker, used to terrain, comfortable with high country. That combination should have favoured survival, and yet it did not. That paradox, expectation meeting absence, is central to the story. Ridge slopes around Going to the Sun are unforgiving. The west face drops hundreds of feet into alpine bowls. Glacial runoff creates slick surfaces. In July, snow still covers parts of the climb, while rockfall is common. In 1963, maps were less detailed. GPS did not exist. Trail markers were fewer. Wilson chose or followed a route that bypassed the main trail. Perhaps he sought solitude or speed. Perhaps he miscalculated. The only certainty is he never returned. Another detail: the disappearance happened during the daytime hours, not after dark, which complicated the hypothesis of a nightfall. If he had been stuck overnight, the forest cover would have concealed him. Instead, he entered ridge terrain in daylight and vanished in broad light. That suggests something sudden: an accident, a fall, a collapse of terrain, or an unseen hazard. Years later, park documents recommend that search strategy account for snow bridge collapse, hidden crevasses, and high-altitude exposure as primary risks for backcountry workers. Wilson's case is often cited in training materials. The mountain became school and memorial both. A newer generation of hikers arrives on the same ridgelines, carrying improved gear, satellite beacons, synthetic clothing, radio locator devices, but the mountains themselves remain the same. The glaciers retreat, but the ridges drop, snowfields remain, and the weather shifts. The wilderness's rules haven't changed just because technology has. Some remote speculation has surfaced: a fly-in by plane, forced movement by wildlife, or even voluntary disappearance. But none of these hold weight in the documented facts. The simplest explanation, accidental fall or loss of direction, remains unproven, but the only theory consistent with evidence. For those who know the mountain, looking at going to the Sun Road from below carries weight. Cars slow at overlooks. Tourists click photographs. They often share the same lodges and trails that Wilson left behind. The juxtaposition is stark. One of America's most visited scenic drives hides within it the descent of a single young man into silence. As seasons pass, searchers still visit the ridges, especially after meltout reveals new rock or crevasse openings. Every now and then a bench is found beyond reach, but no item verified as Wilson's has ever come to light. The park's missing persons file still lists his case as unresolved. The moss-covered stones remain silent. In the Backpacker's Guide you might read, "Heading beyond marked trails increases risk." For Wilson, heading beyond the trail may have meant leaving the world of known risk and entering the world where the mountain's rules dominate. The boundary between safe trail and unknown terrain is thinner than most people believe. The story of David Paul Wilson returns us to a recurring lesson. In the wild, knowledge counts, but it does not guarantee safety. The mountain does not yield its own logic. It wraps itself around a person and then sometimes lets no trace behind. A young man walked into the high country of Glacier National Park in summer 1963. He knew the land, he respected it, but even that was not enough to bring him home. Empty boat at Apgar. Father disappears on Lake McDonald. The day began like so many summer mornings at Glacier National Park. Still water on Lake McDonald, sunlight turning the surface into glass, and the sound of boats creaking softly at the dock near Apgar. Families stood at the shoreline taking pictures. Children tossed pebbles into the shallows, and somewhere in that familiar peaceful setting a man pushed off from shore in a small boat and was never seen again. It was 1976 when he launched that boat, a perfectly ordinary day with nothing to hint at danger. The man was a husband, a father, a visitor who'd come to enjoy the calm of the lake. His name appears in park records from that year, marked only by the details of his disappearance: that he left from the Apgar picnic area, that he went out on Lake McDonald alone, and that when the boat was later found adrift, he wasn't in it. Apgar is one of Glacier's most accessible areas. Visitors come here for sunsets, canoe rentals, and quiet evenings at the lakeshore. It's the last place most people imagine someone vanishing. Rangers see thousands of tourists here each season. Families gather for meals, hikers start and end their days in this spot. But Lake McDonald is deep. Very deep. At its deepest point it drops nearly 500 feet. Its waters, fed by snowmelt, stay cold even in July. Once something sinks into that cold blue darkness, it rarely returns. The man was seen heading out during the day. Weather was stable, the lake was calm, he wasn't far from shore, at least not at first. Some witnesses recalled seeing the boat drifting later in the afternoon, though none could say exactly when he disappeared. When the small rental boat was recovered, the oars were still inside, but the man was not. Word spread quickly through the campground. The father of the family had not returned. The quiet afternoon near Apgar turned uneasy. Rangers were summoned. They moved fast. knowing that on this lake minutes matter. They set out in other boats, scanning the surface and calling out over the water. The shoreline was checked for any sign of someone who had made it out and collapsed from exhaustion. But nothing appeared. Not clothing, not footprints, not sound. By nightfall, the full search was underway. Flashlights traced the edges of the lake. Volunteers walked the shoreline from Apgar down toward Fish Creek, checking driftwood piles and narrow inlets. Boats crossed the water in wide arcs, but the lake remained silent and still. The family waited on shore, hoping for any sign that he might have reached land. Families often speak of the tension that settles in those hours, the way the world seems to hold its breath, the way the clock seems to slow. Rangers interviewed them gently, asking for the last things he had said, what he was wearing, how strong a swimmer he was. Answers came, but none offered a way forward. On the second day, divers entered the lake. Lake McDonald's depth and darkness make underwater searches difficult even with modern equipment. In 1976, the tools were far more limited. Divers could check only areas close to shore and certain sections of shallower rock shelves. The deeper regions, where the lake turns opaque, were effectively unreachable. Cold water absorbs light completely. Even a few feet down, visibility vanishes. Nothing was found. The search continued for several days. Rangers expanded their sweep to the far side of the lake toward the mountains near Snyder Creek. They checked logs along the shoreline that might have caught clothing or debris. They inspected coves where floating items might have drifted. They asked visitors at the lodges if anyone had seen someone leave the water, disoriented or injured. Not one sighting surfaced. What stood out most was the emptiness of the boat. It drifted without signs of panic. No overturned bench, no tangled rope, no sign of capsizing. It suggested the disappearance had been sudden and silent. And Lake McDonald is exactly the kind of lake where that can happen. A person leaning over the side can lose balance. A sudden shift of weight can tilt a small boat. Cold water shock can seize muscles instantly. Even strong swimmers can become helpless in seconds. Hypothermia in these waters doesn't take hours, it takes minutes. The family later said he was comfortable around water, but not reckless. He hadn't gone out looking for danger, he'd simply wanted an hour on the lake. That ordinary decision is one of the details that makes this case so unsettling. Visitors expect danger on mountain cliffs, on remote trails, or near bears. But a short trip on a calm lake near one of the busiest campgrounds, that feels safe, familiar, close to people, close to help. And yet he vanished. Search logs from that season recorded the official outcome. Subject not recovered. Rangers continued checking the lake in the following days, especially during calm spells when objects sometimes surface. But nothing did. The lake kept its depth and its silence. Anyone who has stood at the shoreline at Apgar can picture the moment. The water close to shore is clear, bright green and full of smooth stones. A few yards out it darkens. Beyond that line the lake becomes impenetrable. You can look down and see nothing, and the moment someone slips beneath, they can be lost instantly. This was not the first disappearance on Lake McDonald and would not be the last. The lake, despite its constant stream of visitors, has a long history of holding secrets. Several early-era drownings have never been fully resolved. Boats have overturned. Swimmers have underestimated the cold. The water is beautiful, but it is unforgiving. The father's disappearance also carried the emotional weight of shared fate, the kind where a simple family outing becomes the point around which everything changes. His family had arrived together at the lake. They planned to leave together, but by afternoon the group was divided across a line that could not be crossed, those on shore waiting and the man somewhere in the lake's depths. In the years since, visitors who know the story sometimes stop at the Apgar shoreline and imagine the scene. The picnic tables, the pebbles underfoot, the boats drifting in their moorings, and the strange contrast between a setting so full of life and a disappearance so complete. For rangers, cases like this underscore how quickly normal can turn into mystery. From a calm push-off from shore to an empty boat drifting quietly, the shift can happen in seconds, and once the water takes someone, the lake becomes a second world, one that rarely gives up what enters it. If you stand on the dock at sunset, the lake looks serene. Light catches the surface in gold lines. Mountains mirror themselves perfectly. It's hard to imagine danger in such beauty. But that beauty hides depth. The very cold, very deep water of Lake McDonald is part of its identity, and the father who vanished on that day in 1976 is part of its history. One more story carried beneath the surface of the lake, unseen but not forgotten. Truck at Fish Creek, man gone, the vanishing of Larry Kimball. A dark blue 1998 GMC truck sat quietly in the parking area of the Fish Creek campgrounds, its door unlocked, an entrance receipt on the dashboard bearing the date May 29, 2003. The registration sticker from the park had been stamped earlier that spring, but the man who drove that truck, Larry Kimball, was nowhere to be found. Larry Kimball was a 40-year-old man from Dorr, Michigan. He arrived in the spring of 2003 to work briefly in the park region. By June, his family had not heard from him for weeks. On June 20th, his family reported him missing. The park records show his vehicle logged into the Fish Creek area in Glacier National Park, Montana, at Rocky Point Trailhead, roughly 6 miles from the entrance road, a location that leads deep into wilderness. The Rocky Point Trailhead rises steeply into forest and ridges above the Two Medicine region. From the parking area, one may follow old hill roads or trails that climb toward remote high country seldom visited by casual tourists. At this trailhead, the sense of isolation deepens quickly. The forest thickens, the wildlife grows, the trails fade. For someone entering this zone and then disappearing, the terrain offers the kinds of possibilities that confound searchers. When park rangers found Larry's truck, they noted the keys were in the ignition, the engine cold. Personal items in the cab indicated he'd entered the park and set up camp, or at least had driven to that trailhead with intent. But no campsite was found nearby. No fire rings, no tent, no log of another person seen with him. His disappearance lacked the broader footprints one expects when someone loses track of time, falls asleep, or abandons a vehicle intentionally. Search teams were launched in June 2003. Rangers followed the narrow dirt roads beyond the trailhead. They canvassed the first ridges, looking for campfires, footprints, or evidence of a fall. They flew helicopters over the ridgelines. They hiked drainages where a person might slip and fall into a ravine, and they searched down old mining roads which crisscrossed the ridges near Two Medicine and Fish Creek. Despite the modern tools of the 21st century, nothing turned up, no backpack, no clothing, no remains. One particular detail stood out. The park experienced a large wildfire in July of 2003, the Robert Fire, which swept part of this region. Investigative reports suggest that fire may have obscured or destroyed evidence connected to Larry's disappearance, raising the possibility that even if remains were present, they might have been consumed or rendered unrecognizable. The modern mystery element is strong. Even with park records, digital entry logs, helicopter support, grid searches, and decades of technological advancement, this case remains unsolved. That fact challenges the assumption that modern gear is always enough. For Larry and the terrain he entered, the wilderness seems to have reclaimed the story. Let's consider the timeline. Larry arrives in the region in spring 2003. On May 29th, his vehicle logs indicate he entered the park. By June 20th, his family reports him missing. Somewhere in that 3-week window, he walked, or perhaps drove, away from the world his family knew, into the backcountry of one of America's most remote national parks. His motivations remain unclear. Park records show he was in the area for work, but what led him to that particular trailhead? What decision led him to stop at Fish Creek and walk into the trees? No public record offers clarity. The terrain that he entered is not forgiving. The forest trails disappear into broken ridges. Streams carve steep canyons. Late spring conditions mean snow patches remain in shaded bowls. Meltwater runs swift. A person venturing off-trail can be quickly lost. If something goes wrong, injury, exposure, misstep, the result may be site abandonment. Trucks remain, trails get overgrown, searchers find nothing. Investigators proposed several possible scenarios. 1. Larry suffers an injury, sprain, fracture, fall, and cannot make it out. He either succumbs to exposure or simply perishes where he lies. Over time, vegetation and terrain erase the micro-evidence. 2. He intentionally left the truck and headed into deeper country, planning to hike out elsewhere. But then, something prevented that exit. 3. He left the region altogether, either voluntarily or under duress, and his trail was never picked up because entry into secure wilderness masks footprints and vehicle logs. But the sustained absence of records, no bank withdrawals, no sightings, makes voluntary disappearance less plausible. The family aspect of the story adds weight. Larry was married with children. His family expected him back. They expected contact. They did not expect the truck to wait for weeks, the phone to go unanswered, the search to go silent. The emotional divide between a working man entering a park for a job and a missing man whose truck sits untouched reflects the shared fate of families in disappearance cases. It is the gulf between hope and absence. Over the years, the case has drawn attention from cold case investigators and missing person advocates. The Park Service includes Larry's case in its list of unresolved disappearances in Glacier. The files still list not located and no remains. The terrain, the fire, and the time-lapse have conspired to keep the mystery alive. For hikers and guides, the case of Larry Kimball is a cautionary tale. Modern technology may bring satellite phones, locator beacons, GPS trackers, but in 2003 he was likely without the gear that is increasingly encouraged today. Entering a remote trailhead like Rocky Point demands respect, even, or especially, for those with experience. In recent years, volunteers checking the region have looked at old fire scars, re-examined drainages, dug through leaf litter and debris, but no piece has ever been confirmed as connected to Larry. A boot, a piece of fabric, a tent stake, nothing. The possibility remains that the valley shifted, the snow melted, a branch collapsed. Nature alone may have erased the evidence. The vanishing of Larry Kimball bridges the older legend of glaciers missing and the modern mystery of persons lost in park backcountry. The 21st century tools did not yield an answer. The wilderness still proved a barrier. And so the truck at Fish Creek remains a silent marker. The registration date on the receipt, the keys in ignition, the photo records of his arrival, the search files, the fire maps, the unanswered phone calls, all point to one simple truth. A man entered the wilderness at one of its thresholds and did not reappear. The story is alive not because of resolution, but because of absence. Because despite the modern era, despite the vehicle log, despite the search teams and helicopter flights, the man remains missing. And for his family, every spring brings a reminder that the park opens again, the trails beckon again, and his absence echoes once more into the wilderness. Turned away for a second. The disappearance of Barbara Bolick. There's a moment in every extended hike when you pause to look around. The trail opens up, the view stretches out, you turn your back or look away for a few seconds. On July 18th, 2007, on a bright summer morning in the Bitterroot Mountains northwest of Victor, Montana, that moment became the boundary between presence and absence for Barbara Bolick. Barbara was 55 years old at the time. A resident of the Bitterroot Valley, she was familiar with its hills and trails, an experienced hiker, comfortable in the outdoors, strong and steady. That morning, she volunteered to lead a hike to the Bear Creek Overlook with a visitor named Jim Ramaker. The trail was known to her. The overlook was within reasonable reach. The terrain was not extreme. The weather was clear. No one expected what would happen next. They set out together. At some point, they reached a scenic spot with sweeping views of the valley below. Jim stopped to take in the scenery, to drink it in, and to capture photographs. Barbara was ahead, perhaps 20 or 30 feet ahead, walking steadily, looking at the view, enjoying the moment. Jim stood there, his camera in hand, watching the scene. Then he turned back, glanced again at the view, and when he looked toward Barbara a moment later, she was gone. Not a few steps ahead, gone, but simply not there. According to reports, the time span was very short, less than a minute. Jim turned away and then she vanished. No sound of distress, no falling branch, no cry, nothing to mark the transition. Just the forest and the mountains continued unchanged. The trail stayed open, the weather stayed fine. The only difference was one fewer hiker. The terrain around Bear Creek Overlook is forested, but not impenetrably dense. The Overlook Trail is used by locals and visitors alike. The region climbs through logging roads and old trails, but in that particular section, the view stretches across open hillside and forest edge. You wouldn't expect someone to vanish there as though into thin air. Search teams responded quickly. Local sheriff's deputies, Montana Fish, wildlife and parks officers, and search and rescue volunteers spread out. They worked with canine teams, helicopter support, and grid searches across the foothills. They checked sinkholes, stream beds, game trails, steep ravines, old logging roads. They looked through deer stands and wood processing residue piles. Nothing turned up. No jacket, no phone, no shattered pack, no scent trail, no credible sightings beyond that moment. The lack of trace is part of what makes this disappearance so unsettling. When someone vanishes in wilderness, usual possibilities include a fall, an injury, exposure. In those cases, often some trace remains. A boot, a hole in a branch, a partial footprint, a dropped glove. Not here. The legal missing person record, NAMA's case MP 12518, lists Barbara Bolick missing from Corvallis, Montana, last seen July 18, 2007. The investigation remains open. The community still hopes for answers. In the days after, investigators noted that Barbara's backpack was seen near the trailhead, but when searchers arrived, it was gone. Her hiking boots were not located. Jim's account said they had both stopped at an overlooked bench, eaten a snack together, met two younger men with a dog earlier in the morning, then continued upward. He said he paused to photograph the view and turned back, and Barbara was gone. The two men were reportedly seen by road crew workers, but were never identified further. Some speculated that the two men might be linked, but police found no proof. Others proposed that Barbara may have slipped off a narrow trail, tumbled into a ravine where dense brush concealed her body from aerial and ground searches. The latter is plausible. Terrain there does have steep drop-offs and old logging roads that can lead into thick vegetation and drainages. Yet many who reviewed the case questioned that scenario. Barbara was an experienced hiker. The trail segment at the overlook is visible with a wide bench and rock outcropping. She would have known the area. The brief time difference, the open terrain, the lack of any audible incident all raised doubts that she simply fell unnoticed. Another possibility is a wildlife incident. Mountain lions and bears inhabit the Bitterroots, but animal attacks usually leave evidence, signs of struggle, fur, scent trails. The search dogs detected nothing. No body or bones have ever been found. The possibility of a person's remains vanishing entirely in that terrain in less than a minute over a known trail is rare. In the months that followed, families, friends, and local press revisited the story. Interviews noted that Barbara had taught yoga and was in good health. She was described as meticulous and aware. The idea that she wandered off the trail accidentally struck them as unlikely. For her loved ones, the absence of a body, the absence of evidence, the brevity of the moment when she disappeared, all made the event feel unnatural. In recent years, law enforcement agencies revisited the case, renewed appeals for information, and asked for tips about the two unidentified men and any unusual activity on July 18th. As of 2023, police still ask anyone with information, even small details, to come forward. The file remains open in Missoula and Ravalli County jurisdictions. What stands out in Barbara's case is the ghost trail quality. She was there, then she wasn't. A person stands on a known path. One glance aside, black backpack on. Minutes later, empty space. The rock bench remains, the forest remains, the mountains remain. The missing woman does not. The trailhead remains open. Visitors still walk past the spot. The parking lot is filled in summer. The overlook still offers the same sweeping views, and somewhere maybe the moment she vanished is still present in the ground, hidden in brush, or lost in time. The structure of the trail, the terrain that day, the timeline, all combine to keep this case vivid. For those who lead hikes, the phrase "turned away for a second" becomes a bitter reminder. The idea that someone, even an experienced hiker, can disappear on that timescale shifts our sense of safety. When we step onto familiar trails, we bring a sense of control. Barbara had that sense. Yet control is sometimes an illusion. The wilderness is not always remote. It is right next to roads, overlooks, built-up camp areas. The overlook at Bear Creek is accessible. The cars are near, the road crews pass, the workers' trailhead is visible, and yet a person vanished as though the forest swallowed them quietly. If you stand now at the lookout, you may see a hiker walking ahead on the bench. You may see a friend pause for a photo. You may see a pair of tracks in the dirt. And you may reflect on the fact that in 45 seconds an event can shift a life entirely. The hiker steps ahead. Friends pause briefly, one turns around, the other is gone. No cry, no noise, just an absence that becomes louder over time. Barbara Bolick remains missing. The trail remains accessible. The overlook remains scenic. The mountains remain silent. And the lapse of those seconds remains a reminder that wilderness vanishings do not always take place in deep forests or high ridges. Sometimes they happen on familiar ground. Sometimes they happen on trails known and used. and sometimes they happen so quickly that it leaves nothing behind but questions. Vanished on the Blackfeet Nation, Ashley Loring heavy runner. The story begins not on a mountain trail or a lakeshore, but on a stretch of land that carries centuries of history. The Blackfeet Nation in northern Montana. A place of rolling plains, wind-cut ridges, and a sky so wide it seems endless. In June 2017, under that same wide sky, 20-year-old Ashley Loring heavy runner disappeared. Her case would become one of the most recognised examples of a much larger crisis affecting Indigenous communities across the United States. Missing and murdered Indigenous people. Ashley grew up on the Blackfeet Reservation. She was close to her family, especially her sister Kimberly. She was known for her laugh, her kindness, her presence in the community. She had plans, school, a future she hoped to build. In early June 2017, she was seen at a party. She was seen walking near US Highway 89. She was seen sending messages to friends. Then the sightings fractured, and the timeline blurred. What made Ashley's case especially painful for her family is that, during the first days after she vanished, no one realised she was missing. Ashley's sister was out of state. Her father was hospitalised. Her family thought she was staying somewhere safe. When they learned she'd not been seen in days, they turned to law enforcement and ran into the delays, gaps and miscommunication that so many Indigenous families experience in the first hours of a disappearance. Those hours matter. In Ashley's case, they were lost. The search began almost immediately once her family understood the situation. Kimberly posted flyers. Relatives organised community searches. Volunteers from the reservation and beyond joined in. People scoured abandoned houses, creek beds, and stretches of land near the community of Browning. Tips flowed in. She was last seen with certain individuals. She'd been spotted walking along a rugged back road. Someone had seen her at a party. But the stories conflicted, and no firm evidence emerged. Then came the first significant clue. A torn sweater believed to be Ashley's was found on the edge of a remote field on the reservation. The sweater was weathered but recognisable to her family. Additional items, clothing and other small belongings, were later found in a separate search. But no human remains, no phone, no wallet, just objects that raised more questions. Law enforcement involvement in Ashley's case was complicated by jurisdiction. The Blackfeet Reservation encompasses a large region, and depending on where a person is last seen or where evidence appears, different law enforcement bodies may take lead. Tribal police, county sheriffs, state investigators, federal agencies. Families often find themselves calling multiple departments for updates, repeating the same information to new investigators, navigating a system not designed for fast, coordinated action. Ashley's family faced exactly that challenge. During July and August 2017, search groups were organised on horseback and on foot. They covered miles of brushland and timber. They walked coulees where wind funnels through deep cuts in the earth. They checked abandoned trailers, burnt-out structures, and forgotten edges of the reservation where few people go. At one point, a tip led searchers to a remote area called the Badger Creek region. That search yielded items, but, again, no confirmed trace of Ashley herself. The months passed, then years. Her sister continued to push the case into public view. The reservation's community members kept up hope. The search area expanded far beyond the Blackfeet Nation, into neighbouring Montana towns, across borders, into cities where missing Indigenous women are frequently moved or trafficked. The fact that Ashley was young, Indigenous, and living in a community facing poverty and limited police resources placed her among a category of missing persons who statistically receive less immediate attention and fewer investigative resources. Her disappearance was no longer just the story of one young woman. It had become part of a national conversation. In 2021, the FBI offered a $10,000 reward for information on Ashley's disappearance. National media covered her story as part of the larger MMIP crisis. Families from across Montana and beyond cited her case when advocating for stronger systems, clearer jurisdiction, and faster handling of missing person reports on reservations. Ashley became one of the faces of a movement. Across the Blackfeet Nation, awareness events were held in her honour. Red dress installations, community vigils, marches. Reminders that she had not been forgotten. People wore shirts with her name, placed ribbons on fence lines, lit candles at events. Her story connected to a harsh statistic. Indigenous women go missing at rates far higher than national averages, often in areas with complicated investigative boundaries. One of the hardest aspects of Ashley's case is that even though evidence has surfaced, the sweater, personal belongings, disputed sightings, none of it has answered the central question: what happened to her? Rumours circulated. Some said she'd been taken, others said she'd been harmed by someone she knew, others said she had been trafficked. None of these were confirmed. The case remains open. Ashley's sister Kimberly has said many times that she will not stop searching. For years she walked the land herself. She spoke with anyone who had known Ashley. She followed the faintest leads. Her efforts made Ashley's disappearance one of the most visible unsolved cases in Montana. The story of Ashley's disappearance is shaped not only by wilderness, but by systems, delays and resource gaps. Her case unfolded across deep coulees and pine-topped ridges, yes, but it also unfolded across phone lines, police desks and government offices, places where too many Indigenous families find themselves repeating the same painful plea: help us find her. In the years since 2017, Ashley's case has become emblematic of a movement that demands better data, faster response and clearer responsibility when Indigenous people go missing. It has reminded the nation that disappearances do not happen only on isolated mountain trails or forgotten back roads. They happen in communities full of history, love and resilience. The plains of the Blackfeet Nation still look the same as they did on the day Ashley vanished. The wind moves through the grasslands, horses graze in open fields, families gather near Browning for ceremonies, rodeos, meals and community events. And somewhere in that vast landscape or beyond it lies the truth of what happened to her. Ashley Loring Heavy Runner remains missing. The investigation remains active. The movement she came to symbolise grows stronger each year, and her family continues to search, refusing to let her story fade into silence. The last night out, the mystery of Jermaine Charlo. Downtown Missoula on a summer night feels alive in a way few Montana cities do. Crowded sidewalks, music drifting from bars, people spilling into the street after last call. On June 15, 2018, those sounds filled the air as 23-year-old Jermaine Charlo stepped out of a bar called the Badlander. She'd been out with friends, she laughed, she danced, she posed for photos, and then, sometime after midnight, she walked into an alley behind the building. Within minutes, she disappeared. Jermaine was Salish and Kootenai, born and raised on the Flathead Reservation. She was a mother of 2 boys, deeply loved by her family. She kept in close contact, checked in regularly, and rarely went long without responding to messages. So when her phone went quiet the next day, her family felt the shift immediately. Silence wasn't like her. The last confirmed images of Jermaine came from a security camera behind the bar. She walks through the alley. Behind her is her ex-boyfriend, a man named Michael DeFrance. They appear to talk. They continue together toward his truck. That was the last verifiable moment anyone saw her alive. After that, the timeline fractures. Investigators piece together digital clues: her phone activity, his movements, surveillance footage from nearby locations. At some point during the early morning hours of June 16th, Jermaine's phone pinged a cell tower near Evaro Hill, a rugged, forested area north of Missoula and near the gateway to the reservation where she grew up. The phone's location history ended there. It was never recovered. The details of that night were harrowing for Jermaine's family. They reported her missing on June 16th, but jurisdictional boundaries delayed the investigation from taking full shape. Because Jermaine had been last seen in Missoula but lived on the reservation, her disappearance fell into the gap between tribal authorities, city police, county jurisdictions and federal involvement. Each needed information from the other. Information that could have moved quickly didn't. This delay is a familiar wound for Indigenous families. Missing person cases involving Native women often face slow starts, fragmented communication, and under-resourced departments. Jermaine's case became another example of a broader crisis: the national tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Her family didn't wait. Her aunt, her grandparents, her siblings, her cousins, they all began searching on foot the day after she disappeared. They hung flyers, called friends, drove highways, checked abandoned buildings on the reservation, searched woodlands, riverbanks and back roads. They spoke to anyone who had seen her that night. They pushed her photo into the hands of strangers. And as days turned into weeks, the desperation grew. investigators focused early attention on de France, the last person known to have been with her. He had a history of violence, including prior assault charges involving Germaine. His story about the night changed multiple times. Items were seized from his property, his vehicle was searched, digital data was collected. But without a body, without a confirmed crime scene, and without confessions or witnesses, nothing tied him to her disappearance in a way that could be taken to court. The modern tools that help solve cases, phone records, surveillance footage, text history, GPS, created only a partial picture. Enough to suggest direction, but not enough to prove action. Enough to indicate movement, but not enough to explain what happened in those final hours. As months passed, searches continued around Avaro Hill and beyond. That area is dense, with steep slopes, hidden gullies, and heavy vegetation. The land between Missoula and the reservation contains countless possible hiding places. Volunteer teams, sometimes dozens strong, combed through brush and forest. Search dogs were brought in. Nothing was found. The family built billboards along the highway showing Germaine's face. Community members held candlelight vigils. Tribal organizers held awareness events. Germaine's story spread through Montana, then the Pacific Northwest, then across the country. She became a central figure in the growing awareness of the MMIP crisis. Her family's determination kept her name in the public eye, even as leads stalled. Her disappearance raised deeper questions about how cases involving Indigenous women unfold, even in modern times with digital records and abundant media attention. Why did the initial report take so long to gain momentum? Why did jurisdictional confusion slow efforts? Why do families have to become investigators just to keep a case moving forward? Every year that passed brought new searches, new interviews, new appeals to the public. Law enforcement classified her disappearance as a suspicious missing person case. Tribal officials, the Missoula Police Department, federal investigators, each continued to examine leads. De France was arrested years later on unrelated weapons charges and sentenced on those offences, but he has not been charged in connection with Germaine's disappearance. Without a body or solid physical evidence, the case remains open but unresolved. For Germaine's family, the hardest part has always been the silence. A phone that went dead, a night that ended in shadows, a camera that captured the last steps she took, a digital trail that stopped just short of offering answers, the sense that someone knows what happened but remains quiet. In the years since she vanished, Germaine's story has become a rallying point, not because of its resolution, but because of its lack of one. Her case symbolises the danger Indigenous women face and the systemic failures that too often follow. It represents the lives left in limbo, the families left without answers, and the communities demanding change. Today, when you walk the streets of downtown Missoula, you can stand in the alley where the camera captured her final moments. The bars still fill on weekend nights. Music spills into the street. People walk together after closing time. The spot looks ordinary, and maybe that's the most difficult part. How ordinary it seemed. How quick it was. How easily someone can vanish even in a city full of lights, cameras, cars, and people. Germaine Charlot remains missing. Her family continues to search. Her community continues to speak her name, and her story continues to echo through Montana, a reminder that even in a world wired with digital footprints, a person can step into the night and never be found, gone between shifts. The disappearance of Brandon Brownlee. The story begins not in the mountains or on a trail, but in a city most people consider safe, ordinary, predictable, Missoula, Montana. With its coffee shops, bus stops, river paths, and 9-to-5 routines, a place where thousands of people move through each day unnoticed, and where a man could walk down a sidewalk and vanish without a single witness. That man was 43-year-old Brandon Lamont Brownlee. In early June of 2018, Brandon was living and working in Missoula. He was known to be responsible, steady, and usually easy to reach. Co-workers said he showed up for shifts, stayed quiet, did his job. Friends said he wasn't the type to disappear, to leave without telling someone where he was going. He had a life rooted in routine. But then, one day that month, he didn't show up for work. He didn't answer calls, he didn't text anyone back. The silence stretched on, and the routine broke. The details of Brandon's last known movements are surprisingly thin, something that makes his case stand out. Unlike many disappearances where surveillance footage, creates a timeline or witnesses recall key interactions, Brandon simply fell out of contact. He was last seen in Missoula, then gone. Not on a highway, not in wilderness, in a city filled with people. His family reported him missing soon after realizing the absence wasn't voluntary. They emphasized that Brandon was not someone who would intentionally drop out of frame. He had no history of running, no indication he planned to leave, no sudden life event that would explain disappearing. The initial missing person report reflected this. The behavior was out of character. The Missoula Police Department opened an investigation. Officers spoke with his employer, friends, and relatives. They followed up on places he might have been: his apartment, hangouts, work routes. They checked hospitals and shelters. They checked the jail roster and regional law enforcement databases. Nothing came back. The trail did not begin. It simply ended. His case became one of the growing number of modern disappearances where digital footprints, expected to give answers, provide none. Investigators looked for activity on his phone. None. Financial transactions? None. Social media activity? None. For many people, these digital markers form a pattern of daily life. For Brandon, they stopped all at once, as if someone had unplugged the connection. Missoula is not a massive city, but it is big enough that a person can move out of sight within minutes. Riverfront trails wind behind buildings. Bridges cross the Clark Fork where brush grows thick. Industrial edges line parts of the city. If someone wanted to disappear, or if someone made him disappear, there are places where that vanishing could unfold quietly. As days passed, the case grew stranger. No one recalled seeing him Wood in distress. No one recalled a confrontation. No missing belongings were found on public land. No one reported an abandoned vehicle connected to him. His disappearance created a cold case pattern in real time. A man leaving work, walking through town, taking a bus, stepping outside his home. Any of these could have been his last step. His family kept asking the same questions. Did he meet someone? Did he get into a car? Did something happen near his workplace? Why did no one see him? Missoula has cameras in parts of downtown, but gaps remain. If Brandon walked outside those zones, there may be no footage of him at all. Police considered multiple possibilities. 1. Voluntary disappearance. But his family and friends insisted that didn't align with who he was. He left behind clothing, personal items, and everything that would indicate travel. No bank withdrawals, no job applications elsewhere. No notes, no messages. Voluntary disappearance cases often leave at least one clue. Brandon's did not. Another possibility: foul play. But without a suspect, scene, or evidence, investigators struggled to develop a lead. There were no signs of a fight, no witnesses reporting suspicious activity. In small-town cold case patterns, this scenario is common. The absence of evidence does not eliminate the possibility. A third theory: an accident. Perhaps near the river, perhaps off a trail, perhaps on private property where few people go. But extensive searches around the Clark Fork and surrounding areas found nothing. If he'd fallen or been injured near public access points, someone would likely have found him. The simplest explanation to Liat, that he walked away and met danger, is one of the hardest to prove. And in Brandon's case, years have passed without a single confirmed sighting. His disappearance came the same summer several high-profile missing person cases unfolded in Montana, including multiple women whose cases received wider attention. Brandon's case served as a reminder that adult men also vanish, often quietly, often with fewer headlines, and often without the kinds of immediate public pressure that drives rapid investigation. His absence left his family in a difficult position. They continued calling detectives, posting updates, sharing his photo online. They gathered small bits of information, none of which formed a pattern. They fielded rumours that he'd gone to another state, that he'd been seen on a street corner, that he'd been picked up by someone. None were verifiable. As months passed, Brandon's file shifted from active search to long-term investigation. Missoula detectives still revisit the case, still follow new tips when they appear, still keep his information circulating in statewide law enforcement systems. But the lack of evidence makes progress slow. What stands out in Brandon's disappearance is the absence of the usual narrative markers. No dramatic last phone call, no abandoned car on a highway, no hike gone wrong, no suspicious letter, no social media activity that hinted at concern. No conflict captured on a camera, just a man finishing one day and never beginning the next. For investigators, the mystery is shaped by that silence. Without evidence, no theory can be confirmed. Without sightings, no timeline can be extended. Without remains, no closure can be reached. For the community, the case complicates assumptions. People often think disappearances follow predictable categories. Children taken, women abducted, hikers lost. But sometimes, a man walking between shifts, moving through a city, going about his normal life, can disappear as completely as if he walked into wilderness. In the years since 2018, Brandon's name remains on the list of active missing adults in Montana. His family continues to hope for answers. His friends still speak of him in present tense. His co-workers still remember the day he didn't clock in, and Missoula still carries the unresolved weight of a man who left no footprint behind. In a city full of people, a man disappeared without a trace. Somewhere between one ordinary day's routine and the next, Brandon Lamont Brownlee slipped out of view and has not been seen since. A quiet life interrupted. Heather Lynn Tift. On a quiet evening in early March 2021 in Hot Springs, Montana, the kind of small town where people lock their doors but greet each other by name, 48-year-old Heather Lynn Tift stepped out with one simple intention. She planned to go to a friend's house. That was the last time anyone verified seeing her. What followed was a disappearance that upended a life of routine and drew attention to how easily even the most ordinary situations can become mysteries. Heather lived with her mother in Hot Springs, a town nestled within Sanders County and situated near the Flathead Reservation. She was known to her family and neighbors as reliable, steady, someone who kept in touch. On March 5th, 2021, she told a friend she was going out. She left home. She never returned. Her mother discovered Heather was missing when calls went unanswered, messages unreplied, her keys left in the house, her belongings untouched. What made the disappearance especially troubling was how many typical markers were missing. Heather had left behind clothing, personal items, and most of her life at home, very much unlike someone choosing a new start. The fact that she lived in a reservation-adjacent area brought context. Indigenous communities and rural Montana alike face higher risks and fewer resources when someone goes missing, and Heather's case falls into a broader pattern. As family and local police searched, they found little. Hot Springs Police Department listed her missing. The Montana Missing Persons Clearinghouse categorized the case as unsolved, but no vehicle abandonments, no confirmed sightings, no digital trail emerged in the days that followed. The terrain surrounding Hot Springs is forested yet accessible, marked by roads, homes, small ranch areas, but in Heather's case there was no clear path she took or could be traced. Months passed. Family members drove roads near her home, scoured properties of friends, checked social media postings, contacted lodging houses and bus stations. They asked neighbours, "Did you see Heather leave? Did you talk with her that night?" Everyone said no. She simply faded from view. Investigators considered multiple possibilities. One, voluntary disappearance. But people who know Heather resisted that explanation. She was close to her family, dependent on medication, and under no known threat. She had plans, she had commitments. Leaving without say seemed unlikely. Another, accident. Maybe she walked out into the woods while disorientated and succumbed to exposure. But search teams found no signs of that. Another, foul play. But with no crime scene and no body, the evidence was limited. When the disappearance is set beside the broader problem of missing and murdered Indigenous people, Heather's case takes on another dimension. The Flathead Reservation region has seen numerous disappearances and killings of Indigenous women and men. While Heather was not Indigenous herself, she lived near these communities, and the same dynamics, jurisdictional confusion, resource constraints, delayed investigations, apply. Her story reminds us that rural disappearances often share the same systemic vulnerabilities. Searches in the winter and spring of 2021 examined wooded areas near hot springs, drainages, creeks, and old logging roads. Volunteers used snowmobiles in the early season. They followed bed track footprints. They asked hunters and snowmobile riders if they had seen unusual gear. Nothing concrete emerged. As seasons changed, so did hope. The snow melted, trails opened, but no new leads appeared. For Heather's family, the absence of physical evidence has been one of the hardest parts. They kept expecting something, an object, a sighting, a sign. Instead, the silence deepened. The emotional impact of waiting, of uncertainty, of not knowing whether something happened that night, or whether she walked away to somewhere they cannot imagine, became part of the story. In rural law enforcement records, cases like Heather's are often described in the same terms: missing, no leads, cold. But each case is a unique life interrupted. Heather's case is shaped by the detail that her life before disappearance was quiet, uneventful, known to others. She did not vanish while hiking a remote trail or crossing a wilderness ridge. She vanished while living in a small Montana town, on her way to a friend's house. That proximity is part of the disquiet. The roads she could have taken are familiar. The neighbours would have seen her. Car lights would register. Someone would have noticed if she'd walked into a logging road or been picked up on a highway. The usual narratives of backcountry vanishings don't fully apply. That leaves us without the framing of being lost in the woods. Instead, Heather's disappearance prompts the question, what happens when a person vanishes in plain sight? From the community perspective, Hot Springs rallied. People shared her photo online. Local newspapers published her story. The Montana Missing Persons Clearinghouse listed her case. Search teams rotated volunteers. But the rural context means fewer resources, slower responses, and less media attention than similar cases in larger states or cities. The gap between when she was last seen and when someone realised she was missing made it harder to capture early evidence. In mid-2021, Heather's family organised drives through nearby roads. They talked to people at local agencies, asked for any security camera footage, checked bus lines, spoke to taxi and Uber drivers. They asked for any strange activity the night she disappeared. Each time the answer was the same: no confirmed sightings, no verified lead. In the years following, her case remains active. The Hot Springs Police Department continues to list Heather as a missing person. Outside volunteer groups reference her among other rural Montana disappearances. Her name appears on missing person flyers circulated in nearby counties. The worry for her family remains. Each winter, when snow begins to fall again, they remember the night she left. But no one remembers what they saw after that. Rural disappearances like Heather's draw attention to structural problems. Fewer cameras, longer distances between roads, slower emergency response times, and less public urgency. When someone disappears in a place with fewer passers-by, fewer witnesses, fewer digital footprints, the investigation relies more heavily on old-fashioned legwork. And that legwork can take time to find a needle in a haystack. For Heather Lynn Tift, the needle remains missing. Her mother still lives in the home she shared. She still keeps the door unlocked in hope. At every holiday, every birthday, and every day that passes beyond the last confirmed sighting, the hole in the routine remains visible. What stands out to those who know her story is not only the disappearance itself, but the immediacy of it. A woman leaves home on a familiar street, under familiar conditions, and then is not seen again. That abruptness, that quiet shift from presence to absence, is what makes the case deeply unsettling. It shows that vanishings are not always dramatic. They do not always involve mountainous terrain or rivers or deep woods. Sometimes they involve someone stepping out the front door and simply not coming back. Heather's case prompts us to ask, in a world where digital footprints exist, where phones ping towers, where cameras record activity, how does someone simply disappear? How does routine become vanish? And what does it take to bring someone home when the trail stops at the front steps of a small town in Montana? As each year passes, the hope remains. The search continues. The community waits. The case is listed. The family remembers. The night she left remains silent, and the life she led before disappearance remains the reference point for the possibility that she's still out there, somewhere. The paddleboard and the silence. The disappearance of Emily Rhea. On a summer day in 2024, the surface of Hungry Horse Reservoir lay flat and still, reflecting the steep canyon walls and the sky above. It was July 16th when 33-year-old Emily Marie Rhea drove her black Honda CR-V up South Fork Road, more than 20 miles into the reservoir's remote recreation area. She came with her paddleboard, ready for a quiet afternoon on the water. The next morning, her vehicle was at the boat launch, but Emily was not. Emily lived in West Glacier, Montana. Friends described her as gentle, dedicated, energetic. She worked as a speech pathologist and also helped manage a vacation rental property. On that July day, she carried her board to the riverside boat launch, met no known companions, and launched into the reservoir's deep cold water. Conditions that day seemed ordinary, but what followed was anything but. Her vehicle was discovered the next day at Riverside Launch. Inside were personal items, no signs of struggle. On the opposite shore of the reservoir, more than 2 miles away, the paddleboard was found upside down in the Flossie Creek region. Her paddle was still attached, her carrying case stuffed beneath the bungee cords of the board. Her phone, her life jacket, her bag, none were found. Search and rescue teams quickly arrived, but the water and terrain worked against them. The reservoir is not a gentle lake. It's created by a dam filled by snowmelt and river flow, deep in places, and full of submerged trees and stumps. The shoreline drops off rapidly. Water temperature in July still hovers near 50 degrees. A fall into that water can result in rapid cold water shock, followed by exhaustion and drowning. Side-scan sonar equipment is often required to locate objects on the bottom, and even then, visibility is limited. Within days, the search escalated. The Flathead County Sheriff's Office coordinated divers, sonar sweeps, drones, underwater robots, and K-9 teams on land. Volunteers scoured the shoreline, and aircraft surveyed from above. Yet even with these modern tools, no confirmed sign of Emily's body, no trace of her life jacket, no phone wreckage emerged. The board's placement, the missing items, the remote terrain, all created questions and deepened suspicion. Emily's family questioned whether this was simply a tragic accident or something more complicated. They pointed to odd details. Why was the board found so far from the launch site? Why was her phone missing when she usually kept it nearby? Why did her paddle remain attached and in place? For them, the anomalies suggested the possibility of foul play, or at least an event more complex than a misstep. Search and rescue officials noted the challenges. The reservoir's bottom is littered with debris from logging and flood events. An object could be hidden beneath fallen trees, embedded in muck, or dragged by water currents into inaccessible reaches. Side-scan sonar picks up anomalies, but each must be manually checked by divers or underwater vehicles. The cost, time, and difficulty grow quickly. For months, the family remained involved. They held rallies and awareness events. They travelled the roads around Hungry Horse Reservoir, talked to visitors, asked at lodges, distributed flyers. They engaged a private investigator. They requested federal involvement. Meanwhile, the official investigation remained open and assigned as a missing person case. But in the modern era of digital evidence, there was very little digital trail. Emily's last phone activity, her bank accounts, her social media posts all ended that day. The tracking stopped at the moment she launched. This combination of wilderness risk and modern mystery creates a potent case. The board afloat in calm water, the missing life jacket, the deep reservoir, those are elements of wilderness vanishings. The missing phone, missing bag, the questions about why things don't add up, those are elements of the modern mystery where cameras, trackers and records fail to provide closure. Friends described Emily as someone who prepared carefully for outings. She knew the area. She frequently paddled the reservoir. She was familiar with the risk of cold water and sudden weather change. So her disappearance while on what seemed a routine excursion caught many people off guard. It challenged assumptions that familiarity protects. The terrain around Hungry Horse is dramatic. The canyon walls rise high, the reservoir fills a former river valley, its submerged forests hold hidden voids. Currents from the dam release can shift debris, water levels fluctuate. Even experienced outdoor people assert the need for caution. In Emily's case, those words became a reality. Caution is not guarantee. While months turned into a year, the search efforts continued. The family broadened their approach. Land searches for possible exit routes, investigations into any sightings, possible evidence of trauma or human involvement. They held a paddle-out event at Summers Beach State Park, a gathering of paddleboarders, kayakers and boaters who floated on the water to show support, raise awareness, and send a signal. Emily is not forgotten. On the official side, the sheriff's office laid out the facts. Vehicle at launch, board found distant, no life jacket, no phone, no body. Many possibilities remain, but none has been confirmed. They said the missing items and remote terrain prevented the case from being filed as a suspected crime at present. The investigation was ongoing. The uncertainties swirl. Could she have fallen, been carried by a current, swallowed by underwater logs? Could someone have met her on the shore, forced movement off the water, or assisted her departure? Could she have left intentionally? Her life jacket not found suggests she either did not wear it or it became separated. Her phone missing suggests unplanned event, but also raises questions. The board found far from launch suggests either drift, movement off expected course, or assistance. The modern mystery is that even with so many tools, drones, sonar, records, the case remains unresolved. Digital devices didn't capture a final timestamp. No witness reported suspicious activity from that day. No one was charged. The wilderness vanish aspect is also profound. The reservoir is large, deep, unforgiving. Even if the board had flipped for innocent reasons, the water could easily take someone without leaving more trace. For those who know Emily, the hardest part is the silence, the unanswered questions. The noise of search and rescue equipment and volunteers faded, but the absence remained. The board sitting where it was found, the vehicle at the launch, the empty shoreline, they all became markers of a life interrupted but not explained. In the broader context, Emily's disappearance resonates beyond the local community. It stands among cases of outdoor enthusiasts, of routine water outings gone wrong, of modern investigations stalled, and of families left without clear answers. It reminds us that familiarity doesn't equal safety, that modern tools don't always solve mysteries, and that wilderness still holds its secrets. If you imagine standing on the boat launch at Hungry Horse Reservoir today, you might see paddleboards, kayaks, families of visitors. You might sense the wind rising from the canyon, see the water ripple where the board was found. You might recall Emily's face, her smile, her plans, and then notice how still the water is now at that spot. The reservoir looks calm, the mountains watch, the search continues, the story remains open. A routine drive that never ended, the disappearance of David Butzin. On a November morning in 2024, a man set off on what appeared to be a normal drive near Bozeman, Montana. His vehicle was later found at a trailhead, but the man, 63-year-old David Butzin, did not come home. The drive ended, but his presence did not. What seemed routine turned into a disappearance that echoes just now, not long ago. David Butzin lived in the Bozeman area. His family described him as an outdoorsman. He liked hiking, sometimes off-trail. He was comfortable in Montana's wild country. On November 10, 2024, he was last seen in person. Over 2 weeks later, his family reported him missing on November 25th. By November 26th, his vehicle was discovered at the New World Gulch, Bear Canyon trailhead, just beyond I-90, on the edges of Gallatin County's rugged terrain. The moment of vanish is subtle. One man locking his car, putting on boots, initiating a backcountry excursion. Nothing dramatic, no public call for help, no known witness stating, "I saw him fall." Just a vehicle parked at a place where the road ends and the wild begins. The transition from everyday to unknown, from routine drive to absence, is the core of this chapter. David's vehicle was intact, parked legally at the trailhead, lights off, personal items left inside. The search area, Bear Canyon and New World Gulch. These are remote ridges, forested slopes, deep coulees that drop into the Gallatin Canyon region. Trails begin but quickly fade. Snow begins early in that terrain, risk is real. Over the following months, search and rescue teams, aircraft, horses, dogs and drones combed the region. Yet no trace of David emerged. The modern mystery aspect, in an age of GPS trackers, cell phones, bank transactions, one man disappears and leaves nothing. No ping on a phone, no transaction, no check-in. The case file reports that although David had been known to hike without always notifying family, this time he didn't return and didn't reach out. His phone is inactive, his trail ends at the vehicle, his background complicates the case. In 1985, David Butzin was convicted of the murder of his wife and their 18-month-old son. He served several decades in prison and was released. After his release, he lived in Montana, apparently quietly. His past sparked discussion when his disappearance made headlines. His prior history means some investigators did not assume he was completely innocent. Others wondered if connection to his past played a role, but no evidence to that effect was ever produced publicly. What stands out is how quickly a routine excursion transformed into an absence. For his family, it meant the difference between expecting a weekend return and the realization that 2 weeks had passed without contact. The window for evidence can shrink quickly in backcountry terrain. When someone enters that zone alone, or assumedly so, the rules change. The search efforts included large-scale operations in June 2025. Ground teams deployed, search dogs tracked blind trails, drones scanned ridges, helicopters hovered over treetops, horses carried riders into untracked country. Yet the same result, nothing confirmed. Every file entry ends in "not located." The sheriff's statement echoed concern. "We believe he has not survived. Something must have happened." When the investigation was opened, multiple hypotheses were considered. 1. Accident, a fall from a ridge, loss of footing, severe injury, inability to move. In Montana's cold terrain, one can succumb quickly. Another, medical issue. At 63, physical conditions can arise unexpectedly. Another, voluntary disappearance. His history made this possibility plausible to some, but the family said that made little sense. He left behind a life, a home, and had told no one he planned to depart. Because his vehicle was parked at the trailhead, investigators looked at the map. New World Gulch, Bear Canyon, narrow paths, elevation changes, steep drainages. Snow had already covered parts of the ground. If David entered the woods and slipped into a ravine, search teams might struggle to find him. Rocks fall, snow drifts, and vegetation regrows. Evidence can vanish. And yet this is not a story of deep wilderness only. It's a story of something that begins at a trailhead near a highway, where everyday vehicles meet seldom used paths, where roads end and possibilities widen. The known and the unknown touch. For Bozeman residents, the case remains visible. Flyers hang at outdoor shops, the county sheriff's office posts updates, family members drive search routes themselves. Social media threads examine aerial footage of the region. Every report of a boot print in snow, a campsite abandoned in spring, a hiker seeing a man matching his description is logged. But none are verified. What the story underscores is how recent this disappearance is. In November 2024, so far we stand just months beyond it. Other chapters in our documentary trace disappearances decades ago. Here's one that resurfaces almost now. This matters because it reminds the audience disappearances are not just history, they're current. They're happening in wilderness, but also at the threshold between road and ridge, between vehicle and unknown. For the family, each spring thaw brings heartbreak. Snow melts in Bear Canyon, trees bud, tracks become visible again. Every year they return hoping for something new to show. A trace, a campsite, a forgotten rope. Every year the silence remains. In the broader narrative of missing persons in Montana, adult men and backcountry enthusiasts sometimes vanish quietly. The public assumption may lean toward younger women or children, or those deep in remote canyons. But David's case reminds us that vanishing cross age, gender, expectation. They happen in a car parked at a trailhead. They happen quietly. They happen now. When you imagine the day he left, the engine turned off, keys in ignition, boots laced, pack on his back, morning light on the trees. He waved maybe. He set off. He passed into the woods, toward a slope, a ridge, maybe a log trail beneath snow. And then he was gone. No camera captured his fall. No message recorded his last words. No badge clipped his body. The modern mystery is how one man's steps into open country turned into a case file entry, still missing. His name remains on the active missing list of Gallatin County. His vehicle sits in records. Search logs note ground coverage, drone sweeps repeat visits, but the ground says nothing new. In the end, the routine drive that never ended leaves a larger question. What happens when someone we expect to return simply doesn't? And how do we understand the space between routes, ridges and radar, where a man can vanish and the world keeps driving by? David Butzin's story brings us to the present moment, reminding us that the landscape of Montana is always shifting, always hiding, always asking, who's next to walk off the map? Circumstantial evidence, no body. The Shannon LaBelle case. In the small city of Helena, Montana, in late February of 1999, a young father set out looking at a muscle car and never returned. That young man was 23-year-old Shannon Claire LaBelle. He had a daughter, a job he held, a family who counted on him. On February 23rd, he told his mother he was going to Townsend to look at a car with a friend, and then he vanished. 25 years later, his body has not been found, and the case remains one of Montana's most haunting cold disappearances. Shannon lived in Helena. He was the second youngest of 7 children. He was a father to his young daughter, Jaden, whom he adored. On the day of his disappearance, he withdrew several $1,000s from a credit union, money he intended to use for the car purchase. Later, his red 1976 Chevrolet truck, which he often drove, was never seen again. The car he was planning to buy, the owner could not be located. The friend who was with Shannon that day changed his story multiple times. These pieces form the ghost trail: inconsistent accounts, missing vehicle, cash withdrawn, and no final location of the man. On February 23rd, as dawn broke in Helena, Shannon left his home in his truck, drove to the credit union, got the cash, and then left for Townsend with his friend. That friend dropped him off, or claimed to, but Shannon never returned home, never called his daughter, and never showed up for his shift. His phone went unanswered, his truck never came back, his red truck vanished together with him. Investigators later described the case as endangered missing, and logged his case as missing person number MP 253 in the national system. Investigators followed many leads. They searched for the muscle car, they tracked the friend's changing statements, they talked to other people who said Shannon might have gone to Butte, Montana. They searched fields, rural roads, barns, old farmsteads outside Helena. They rebuilt timelines. They mapped his bank withdrawal. They looked at his truck as possible starting point of a drive west, east, north, anywhere. But no physical evidence ever surfaced. No body, no truck found, no confirmation of what happened after 1999. Detective Richard Drysdale, who catalogued the case for many years, said he believed he knew what happened and who may have been involved, but lacked the evidence to act. He described plenty of circumstantial evidence pointing to foul play, but not enough to bring charges. The gap between what law enforcement thinks and what they can prove is the central tension in this story. For Shannon's family, the uncertainty has become a daily reality. His daughter grew up without her father. His mother died in 2007 without ever knowing. His siblings still carry the memory of his smile, his laughter, his muscle car projects. Yet none carry a grave, a name on a tombstone, a closure. Instead, they carry question marks. The ghost trail in Shannon's case is made of shadows. The missing car he planned to buy, the money he withdrew, the vanishing of the truck, the friend who changed his account, the rural roads where no one recalled seeing him. These clues hang together awkwardly but persistently, and they underpin the investigators' belief that something malicious happened, even if we cannot point to where or how. In Helena and its surrounding hills, searchers braved winter meadows and spring thaw. They drove gravel roads, looked through barns, traced transcripts of telephone calls. They asked ranchers if they had seen Shannon's red truck. None did. They checked Montana license plate records. They followed lead after lead. None produced the key piece. What happened to Shannon after he entered that car deal excursion? The longer the case remains unsolved, the more the atmosphere around it shifts. It becomes less about what could have happened and more about what is likely. Investigators estimated the odds that Shannon walked away voluntarily as low. He left behind his daughter, his job, his truck, and the muscle car dream. He did not appear to be depressed, nor did he pack for a new life. He left for a quick errand and never returned. The circumstances suggest instead that someone knew more than they said, that the friend may have had a role, that the car purchase story may have been a cover, that Shannon's route from Helena to Townsend intersected with rural backroads and properties seldom checked. But people talk quietly about those roads, because eventual justice sometimes begins with a witness speaking for the first time. But in this case, no one has yet. For those who live in Helena, Shannon's disappearance is cautionary. A man with a truck, a plan and a daughter can vanish the same way a trail disappears into brush. The place where the car left, his residence on Villard Street, the credit union stop on Lindale, those places stay the same. The red truck's absence is the ripple, the missing friend's changing story is the echo, and the missing father is the shadow. In the archives of the Helena Police Department lie 3 large binders of evidence: interviews, search reports, maps. The 3 binders mark years of work by Detective Drysdale and others, yet the final sheet is blank. The case is still active. The family receives annual reminders, a phone call each year, a poster still printed with Shannon's picture and the date he vanished. For the ghost trail narrative, the case remains potent. People still call in tips. Someone saw a truck with a boxer engine west of Helena in 1999. Someone heard two men talking about disposal outside Townsend. Someone remembers a muscle car ad in a small Montana ranch bulletin. None of these tips were verified, but they persist. They are the threads of hope and frustration. In small-town Montana, a missing person often becomes part of local memory. Shannon's image is still on billboards. People who passed him in his truck still sometimes wave, saying, "Shannon, we won't forget." His daughter has children now. She still carries his name. The chair left for him at her wedding remains empty. The memory remains real. The case's classification is important. No body, no scene, but convincing circumstantial evidence. That means no prosecution, no charges, just investigation. That means the case lingers. That means the family waits. The justice system remains bound by evidence, not by feeling, and in the gap between knowledge and proof lies the grief of thousands of families across Montana. When you think of Helena, you might recall the state capitol, tree-lined streets, snow falling in winter. You might imagine people coming and going in cars, going about errands. On that day in February 1999, Shannon LeBeau went about one such errand, and then he was gone. His disappearance started with a simple plan. Look at a car, buy his dream, come home. Instead, it became a missing person case that spans decades. And although we may believe we know what happened, and we believe who may have done it, the law cannot act without proof, so the file remains open, the binders remain on the shelf, the ghost trail remains alive. Still missing on the Blackfeet, the disappearance of Gabe Calf, Boss Ribs, on the windswept plains of northern Montana where the mountains rise without warning and the sky seems too large to hold, lies the Blackfeet Reservation. Generations have lived and died on this land. Stories are carried in families, names pass through time, and among those names now is one spoken with worry, grief, and unresolved fear. Gabe Calf, Boss Ribs, a young Blackfeet man who vanished and whose family still waits for answers. Gabe was known for his warmth, his humour, and the way he moved through Browning with ease. He had friends everywhere, cousins in nearly every corner of the reservation, and the kind of smile people remember. He grew up in a community where extended family is not just common but central. When he went missing, the pain echoed across the reservation almost immediately. Everyone knew someone who loved him. The circumstances of Gabe's disappearance remain complex and painful. He was last seen on the Blackfeet Reservation under unclear conditions. Some recall seeing him in town. Others say he may have been walking along one of the long stretches of road that run between Browning, Star School, and the rural housing clusters that dot the prairie. Those roads, stretching miles between homes, can swallow detail. They are long, open, empty, and easy for someone to disappear upon without witnesses. When Gabe did not come home, his family began searching. First by calling around, then by driving those roads themselves, then by checking the brush, the coulees, the abandoned buildings. For the family, each day of silence grew heavier. In the early days, they hoped he might walk in. Maybe he was staying with a friend. Maybe he had gone somewhere without telling anyone. But as hours turned into days, the worry deepened. Local law enforcement opened a missing person case. The Blackfeet tribal police followed leads, conducted interviews, and coordinated with surrounding agencies. But the information remained sparse. No confirmed sightings, no camera footage, no known direction of travel. On reservations, some roads have few or no security cameras. Some homes lack doorbell or business cameras. Much of the land is open prairie or dense brush. Even when dozens search, the land reveals little. As weeks passed, the uncertainty grew into a familiar pattern, one that indigenous families across Montana know too well. The pattern of missing sons, missing daughters, missing relatives whose cases gain attention at first and then fade unless families fight to keep the story alive. The Calf Boss Ribs family did exactly that. They organised search parties. They walked the coulees themselves. They posted flyers. They spoke publicly again and again, even when it hurt. Community members too joined the effort. Volunteers spread out across miles of reservation. Hunters checked back roads. Horseback riders searched inaccessible terrain. People brought drones. Others checked abandoned vehicles and long unused buildings. The searches were intense, repeated and wide. Yet none brought Gabe home. The case became part of the larger and heartbreaking MMIP crisis. Missing and Murdered Indigenous People, which affects native communities across Montana at rates far exceeding the general population. On the Blackfeet Reservation, the crisis has taken many lives and left many families in limbo, waiting for answers that may never come. Gabe's disappearance became a symbol of the crisis. His face appeared in vigils, on t-shirts, in awareness campaigns, on handmade signs placed along US 2, each sign a plea, someone knows something. For investigators, Gabe's disappearance sits at the intersection of limited resources and vast geography. The Blackfeet Reservation covers more land than some small states. Search efforts require coordination, manpower, and equipment that rural agencies often struggle to maintain. And without concrete evidence, a phone ping, a witness timeline, a recovered possession, the search for Gabe moved through uncertainty rather than direction. Rumours inevitably circulated, as they do in many unsolved disappearances. Some speculated he might have encountered danger. Others feared he may have been harmed and left in remote terrain. Others believed he may have walked off and suffered exposure. Yet none of these theories have been confirmed. The family and investigators have to hold all possibilities at once. For his family, the hardest parts are the silence and the waiting, the long nights, the empty chair at gatherings, the birthdays without him, the holidays where people speak his name and feel the gap it leaves in the room. Each passing season marks more time without answers, but also renewed determination. They have said publicly that they will not stop searching until Gabe is found. Whatever the outcome, whatever the truth, what keeps the case alive is not only the family's persistence, but the community's memory. On reservations, memory is collective. People remember where they were when they last saw someone. They remember conversations, routines, moments that might matter later. When someone goes missing, that memory becomes a lifeline, a way to keep the person from fading in the public consciousness. For Gabe, that memory remains strong. Even now, years later, volunteer searches still occur. Flyers still appear in windows. Tribal officials still reference the case when discussing the need for improved investigative resources, better interagency communication, and faster response times. Gabe's disappearance, like many in Indigenous communities, highlights systemic issues: underfunding, jurisdictional delays, and the difficulty of missing person investigations in rural environments. Standing on the plains of the Blackfeet Nation, you can see why the land both protects and conceals. The horizon stretches endlessly. Coulees cut deep channels through the earth. Brush grows thick in unlikely places. The wind can erase footprints in minutes. A person can be near, so near, yet unseen. That is part of the tragedy, and part of the fear. For Gabe's family, the search is both physical and emotional. They continue to look. They continue to call out for information. They continue to ask anyone who might know something to come forward. They continue to live with the reality that someone, somewhere, does know what happened and has not spoken. The story of Gabe Calf Boss Ribs ends not with resolution, but with the unresolved truth of a family still waiting. And with that waiting comes the reminder that in Montana's Indigenous communities, disappearances are not rare events or distant tragedies. They're present, current, and ongoing. They shape families, they shape communities, they shape the land itself. Gabe is still missing, his family is still searching, and the Blackfeet Nation still carries his name forward, refusing to let him be forgotten. These stories show how someone can vanish on a hike during a drive on the water, or while walking through town. Some cases are old. Some happened only months ago. All remain open. Montana's land is wide, its roads long, and its communities close. But even here, answers do not always come. For every name, there are families still waiting, and until the truth is known, their search does not end.